Well, well,
Good morning, Dr. Brad. It's so good to see you this lovely Saturday morning, November 12th, 2022.
it is, and it's episode 2089.
Yes, yes.
Welcome, everybody.
This brings a whole new meaning to I'm going to have an episode.
We're not playing. It's not very good. Like Kurt was just commenting that I had been working. I had my game face on. I'm all serious.
Yes, we have
Good.
to smush you around a little bit and get you all loosened up again.
It's an interesting function. It is interesting. Yeah, so here we are. It's 38 degrees here in Arizona, 42 now, I guess. It's just winter is coming.
Alexa, what's the temperature?
Right now, it's 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, expect a high of 69 degrees.
Makes no goddamn sense here in New England. It was like 40 degrees yesterday. It's 69, 70 today.
That'll be nice. Are your trees still there?
Say again?
Are the leaves still there? Or are they fallen?
They're on the way. They're getting there. I mean, it's really just sunlight that changes them, right? So
Right.
I'm trying to think of some way I can make fun of you, but you with sunlight.
No, it's so difficult.
It just can't.
It's such a challenge.
It's actually fairly hard to tease you. That's why I try it. I try it with such vigor.
You do good work. Well, it's quite a week with the election this week.
Oh my freaking God, what a insanity.
And it is like there's an energetic function there that is to be discussed, because it's like the slow learners apparently require more energy to be input for them to learn in sufficient quantities to make a difference.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it's just true. I mean,
and so it's like it's appalling, isn't it? This is
it's appalling that it's what's most appalling to me is that it requires social proof in order to actually stick. It's like you have to be as IQ goes down, so to speak, or that's probably the wrong way to frame it, but as mouth breathing increases.
Oh my.
The problem you get is that only social proof works, so it's a matter of containment. So you need social proof to contain the stupid. And it's somewhat frustrating that it's so difficult to construct the social proof when you're in competition with a government who tries to create a social unproof with things like
right?
propaganda, which I'm not going to go into the.
We understand one another.
Into the fiascos going on today, but yeah, sure.
Right, so we're still in peak prey animal.
Yes.
There's not enough predators.
Yes, yes.
So we're just still evolving more predators by outrage, right?
Yeah.
But it's amazing that it seems so self-evident what's going on, but it's not enough evidence.
Well, it's not that there's no evidence. It's that the reason people seek change, seek evidence or opportunity is when their condition is such that they have to change. And then in order for them to even though they have to change, they need social proof. And social proof has to be created, and it can be created truthfully and correspondingly, or it can be created untruthfully and non-correspondingly. And the problem with truthfully and correspondingly versus untruthfully and non-correspondingly is that non-correspondingly is cheaper than correspondingly. And so now you have the problem of not only do we require social proof, but we have to overcome all the non-correspondent but cheap. In other words, cheap men mean minimally adaptive. falsehoods that come out there in order to get to some sort of truth and correspondence that will actually work, despite the fact that people have to pay the cost of change. That's why most of the time things don't change unless there's an economic collapse. It's because that's the only time they have the incentive to produce change.
They have
Or
no
they're-
choice.
They have no choice.
Mm.
So that's why, it's like the whole thing I was saying is that for years is that, I see the intersection of the cycles, but the problem is you can't predict how long it's going to take people, because you can't really predict when a correction is going to happen. You could say it's going to happen in this,
Right.
it's got to happen, right? And it's going to happen in this range, but you have no idea how, like the one that's happened, the correction is happening right now is rolling out so slowly, it's causing a boiling of frog effect in the population. Meaning that they're not sensing the severity of what's coming because it's happening gradually.
It's too slow.
It's happening slowly, whereas if you get like a 1929 crash or a 2001 crash, it becomes
Shocking. Shocking.
It shocks you into paying attention.
Yes.
Whereas if the temperature is just, you start boiling like the frog, right?
Right.
It's a myth, by the way. The frog will jump out, but it's a great analogy. And no, I didn't run that experiment myself, though I did consider.
Damn you people thinking
Anyway, not that cruel. So the net, I kind of got myself down into all the. My mind is reiterating all the times I lit the kitchen on fire, blew the house electricity.
that was an accident, Mom.
The thing is, my parents never caught on how dangerous it was to leave me home alone.
I'll show them.
Anyway, so where were we? We were talking about how
Boiling frogs. Shocking.
So the problem is you can't, the public is being, this crash is happening slowly. And it's probably because it's happening so globally.
Well, they
So
they blame everything else. It's like, oh, Putin. They will make up an excuse for everything. It's like, COVID-19 there's excuses for why it's happening, and it does not have anything to do with the systemic nature of the errors.
Right. And of course, these are effects that we perceive as accelerants only because we don't understand that they're black swans. In other words, unpredictable, but they are unpredictable in content, but not unpredictable in category. In other words, these black swans are going to happen whenever you get this far out of line, right? And the fundamental problem that got out of line is we've run out of middle class in America to burn, right? In order to dragging the world out of ignorance and poverty by policing the world system of trade by offshoring our technology and labor. So we have no more way of paying for that. Of course, they don't describe it in terms of macro payments like that, right? And so they obscure it with all this shallow moralizing.
Mm-hmm.
So the people are being boiled, and I enjoyed being right again about the crypto crash this week. It was kind of, although I shouldn't be, because so many of my friends are libertarians and are such fans of the crypto community. But like I said, I'm going to be right about that one. I was right about that one. I'm going to be right about it. Sorry, just what it is, and it's not because. And anyway, so I'm going to be right about that one. I was funny to hear Peter Zeihan talk this week because he said, well, his thing was he couldn't believe Russia could lose the war, and I'm like, once you realize it's they move it from a blitzkrieg to an economic problem, and Russia has to lose the war. It doesn't have the economy to conduct a war, right? I mean, so that's deterministic. Why does the Zion see that? He said the same thing about Twitter yesterday. Like
What
Twitter's,
did he say?
he said Twitter's, what I'm hearing from inside Twitter is that it's going to fall apart. I'm like, you know, if Elon Musk just said I need 1,000 smart guys to come fix this, we'd all just go show up. Right? I mean, it wouldn't take any problem at all. And I've bought technology companies before where people said the same thing, Doolittle's going to do this and whatever. And, you know, you cause a lot of disruption, but it's always the people who have no value that complain. Right? The people who have intrinsic value, they don't complain.
They're working.
Well, they're working, and also they get paid for producing a deliverable that's tangible.
Mhm.
Right? So they're free of blame. And the next thing is that you don't really get in trouble. In other words, there's no, you know, you might have a political bias inside a company like that.
Mhm.
And I'm sure the engineers, some engineers do, but engineers are the people who are going to have the least bias. And beside the fact that they make money either way. And the only people that matter are the engineers. So, and then the second thing is Twitter. I've bought companies whose software is more complex, vastly more complex than Twitter, and vastly older, consisting of more generations of code. And you know, you think they talk about it like it's, you know, oh my God, right? It's not. Twitter's like the dumbest fucking app on the internet, right? It's not successful because it's smart software. It's successful because it had the founder effect, right? So, and
Yes.
the founder effect created the network effect. And so the thing about Twitter is you can't, you know, you can go off and try to create a Gab or a Getter or a Truth Social or whatever, but you can't overcome the network effect of the body of people that are just millions and millions and millions of people around this thing. And so what's going to really happen is that maybe some liberals will go off and find the liberal equivalent of Gab, which is the right wing side, right?
So don't make it a ghetto.
They'll just make another ghetto, right? And so you know, what we're looking for is the majority middle class economy, so to speak, of information, which is really what you get if they take something like Twitter and just remove all the slurs, but leave in all the content. You know, I don't want to hear the N-word either. I mean, I just don't find. I don't see the point. I mean, if you have to get to the point where you're offending someone with a slur, you're admitting you're wrong. You failed.
That's right. That's
You're
right.
Not,
It's
an admission
the
of
indication of the end of that you have failed all your arguments.
Yeah,
Failed.
I mean, it's like I don't want to hear that. I deal with taboo subjects all day long, but you don't hear me saying. I mean, and you're part of this, right? You're part of. Well, they're intrinsically bad. No, I mean, we're just fucking bots, all of us, right? You know.
And they whine.
And bots whine, and so what? I mean, just normal.
That's just how it goes, man.
You know, so I don't really. So anyway, I'm trying to circle back around to the original after making this point is that, you know, Zion's another example of people getting or Elon Musk. Great example. Elon Musk comments on Ukraine as if it's a business deal when it's actually a moral war at this point, right? The minute you get it, you get down to where, like, one of the reasons Europe.
That's a very interesting formulation. I want to discuss this more.
Right. Because I got to put it in context.
Yes, sir.
If you're in European history, right, we have this. It's like having Southern Civil War heroes. The North isn't saying that they agree with this hero. They're saying he did his duty for his people. Reconciliation is possible if we are only doing our duties within the limits of Christian ethics.
Yes.
That's how Europeans civilized war, right? I mean, it's not true, not false that peasants starved and whatever, but nobody went out to kill the peasantry. Right. So the thing is, once you have a political war, reconciliation is possible. But once you have a moral war, reconciliation isn't possible.
Ah, I see.
And so it's the same thing I said with when they had the
crusade then.
Correct. And so you make something a moral war and it just doesn't end, ever. So this is the problem with what I said with when they were doing the thing with the vax. I said you're creating an empirical argument to a moral war conflict because you're bridging the gap, you're depriving people of the responsibility of self-choice, and now you've made a political war, a political conflict, into a moral war. And once you have that moral war, people never stop.
Oh, it's this, yes, it's the Reformation.
Right. You can't. So the whole point of keeping wars political is not making them moral, because once you've made it moral, reconciliation is impossible, because now you're not wrong, you're evil.
Right.
Right. And so,
Right.
and
It's
so,
incorrigible.
right. You can't do it. So, so this is how they got the Nazis, right? Is that they made them evil and moral rather than political, despite the fact that Nazis' original presumption was political, right? And so this is the whole problem we're facing today, is that this moral versus political has happened to the population. So when it was Democrats and Republicans, and when the South was still prohibiting the Republicans, in other words, there were blue dog Democrats, right? Then you had conservatives and liberals in both parties. But once you turn it into once the Democrats the South got over their century of disdain for the Republican Party because of the Civil War, then it became an easy way to bifurcate the country. And then the race Marxists came in and took advantage of it. And so what you got was, we've got now the conflict isn't political, it's moral. We actually hate each other now. And so you can't reconcile a moral conflict. And so this is, or moral conflicts are reconciled by extraordinary defeat. In other words, you have to wipe out the enemy.
Yeah, you utterly crush them, demoralize them.
Right. That's the only way to win. And so the beautiful arc of this conversation that we're having is that we're able to draw we're in this conversation, at least I'm trying to draw the pattern, given you're baiting it, saying, well, the problem here is that once conflicts become moral, you've ended the chance for reconciliation, which is why Europeans are so good at reconciliation, because we follow the Christian ethic in war. So we've domesticated warfare to maintain its political ability, because then if we all do our duty, we can reconcile, because we were doing our duty despite, right? It's a matter of being wrong and dutiful versus being immoral and evil, right? And you can't reconcile evil. Evil has to be killed, but wrong can be forgiven. And so that's why you try to keep conflicts, political and moral. And that's why.
Wait, but political and amoral.
Amoral. Well, that's a great question. Telling, like, our thing of don't abuse prisoners.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's amoral. That's the question. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying I'm trying to clarify it, because you had an insight there, and I'm not sure whether it's right or wrong. So you take care of prisoners at a cost. That's
yes.
Right. That's moral, versus you take care of prisoners. You don't hurt prisoners, and that's amoral. And I'm saying that.
Okay.
All right. So
no, they have to take care of them. So there's a moral function there.
Right.
Which is a shared moral duty between the sides.
Right. And so reconciliation is possible. Like, if we fight for different teams, reconciliation is possible. This is the virtue of the male method of warfare versus the female. Women never forgive. Right. And the men do, because we're doing our duty on behalf of a polity or group, whereas women are always acting in their self-interest.
I know. But so I will point to this as, like, the West has been overtaken by alien subculture,
religion.
betas, and they're not Christian.
They're not Christian.
They're immoral,
They're immoral.
and they are the ones that transformed this. The leadership of the West has transformed this to moral.
Correct.
warfare.
Right, and which is the female method of warfare. So,
Yes.
so the problem. This is a brilliant hook for general understanding. Is the reason conservatives tend to fail is because we're leaving the open of claiming you're just wrong. Right. In other words, the left is just wrong. They'll learn. This is a reflection of how we conduct.
They won't learn.
Well, right, but women don't. The female mind doesn't learn. So I'm not going to run with that, despite that. I just had 1,000 beautiful ideas just explode across my mental horizon.
It was like a kaleidoscope.
It was just like, wow, look at all the places I could go with this. I'll just do. But so no, but it's a really, your statement there was really profound. Is that they converted Western ethics, which is not good and evil. It's order and chaos, duty and reconciliation, right, to the feminine and religious good and evil, because good and evil aren't reconcilable. That's
Right.
a really that discussion we just had is really profound.
It is, and
And I just wonder, it's too bad that we don't, we have thousands of viewers instead of hundreds of thousands, because
well,
that's
it's just going to take a minute, Kurt.
Okay, fine.
But I don't.
I submit to you being right most of the time. All right, fine.
You're very kind. But we haven't even finished a half a glass of coffee, and it's half an hour in, and we are hitting the needle is pinned on profound.
Well, it's because, one of the problems of it's just like, this is something I've been pondering this week because other people have. I was talking with Rudyard from What Our Fault Hist. And the problem is people have to have they have to see the problem in order to understand, to have reason to comprehend it.
That's
Otherwise,
right.
their intuition just doubles down on what's regularity for them.
That's right.
And so what's happening now is, I felt like when I first started talking, I was talking to the wall, right? But I'm like, it's talking to the wall, and I'm saying this is deterministic. It's going to happen. And it wasn't just me. I mean, you bring up Turchin all the time, right? Turchin was there, right? So it's not just me, right? I mean, Hayek was there back in the fucking 30s or 40s. No, excuse me, 60s, right? He was there. So it's not like people don't get there. The problem is that until they're in the heat, right? Until the temperature is raised high enough that the frog says, "Fuck, I better get out of here." You can't get any ideas across to people.
It's the synapses. They're sedated by their distractions of their material life.
Yeah.
And it's like this: as long as it seems to be fairly well functioning, the things you do and the intuition you're employing, you're going to double down.
Correct. It's just neural economy, right? Why should we expect it to be any different? Well, we should expect it to be different because it's possible to make it different. We taught people scientific law as general rules instead of this field of superstitions and specific rules. Now we vastly increased people's demonstrated intelligence across the world. Well, I mean, there's no reason we can't do what we're doing now and say, well, you need what you've learned in the hard sciences can be just as equally applied to the physical sciences. Well, the problem is that they can look at the physical sciences and it disturbs their nature of religion a little bit, but not all that much. But the problem is the minute you start talking about, now we're going to disturb what your values are, right? In other words, you might value things that very highly that turn out to be frankly evil, because every culture has a portfolio of rights and wrongs and goods and bads and orders and chaos and evils and goods. So you might have things you really value, right? But the minute that becomes personal, it's kind of hard to learn because now you're cherished, you're cherished value, what's the cherished one?
Sacred cow.
Sacred cows. Now your sacred cows are all exposed for what they are. Is that, well, you know, this turns out to be false. Now, and if you think about it, you know, we do a lot of this. One of the values of what you and I do together online for the public, you know, for the audience, is that we do comparative civilizational analysis, right? Which ends up shitting on everybody, right?
Pretty much evenly.
So we showed that, but in the comparative analysis, what you get to see is just how hard it is for us to change metaphysical value propositions, right? I mean, cultural metaphysics, our group things that are central to our group strategy and our central values. We all resist that with every effort in our being, because it would force our entire neural economy to rearrange, and our accumulated status and self-image we've brought up for not only ourselves but for our group. You know, we've built this edifice up, and only to say, it's like my mother telling me, you built that big thing out of those styrofoam blocks, because I would build these castles and stuff out of those styrofoam blocks, and then you break it down. I mean, well, no, that's the fun, right? But I mean, nobody wants to do that to their neural economy.
Too much work.
That's well, it's actually frightening.
It's irritating.
How do you make decisions anymore?
It's chaos.
Tell
It's
a
chaos.
feminist that she's intrinsically evil because she's not a compatibilist, right? I mean, you're intrinsically evil. How's she gonna get out of that?
It's not processable. You can't process it. So this is interesting. I had conversations with some nice people this week, because it was, you know, we're all kind of coming to grips with the United States and how it's making decisions in the moment, and it's just a good Christian fellow told me, he says, it's not a Christian nation anymore. And I said, that's an interesting formulation, because I don't agree. He said, the nation and the state used to be fairly coincidental. The United States became a multinational. The United States became a multinational empire in the late 20th centuries. It contains a Christian nation that will exert itself once again as a separatist movement, is what's going to occur.
Right. But you create an empire, you're going to get revolutions for separation, because all empires encounter the fact that people want agency for their group, right? And the value of empires is you create trade. That's really the value of empires. So we think of empires as a direction, but it's actually a stage. All right. The purpose of an empire is it's like doing we call it doing roll-ups in business. I'll go out and buy 20 companies over the course of 2 years and integrate them. But what's happened is the borrowing cost has gone for each company has gone down, right? Right. The marketing cost has gone down. The legitimacy of working for the company, each of those companies, has gone up. So you can well, I mean, it's just it's safer when you.
It's the status. Its opportunity costs are dropping all over the place.
Correct. So all these costs are changing, and so what happens is just like China is a big but very poor country. It can, because it's got one central government, it can put all this money into a few things like the military that is a really bad return, it turns out. But in Europe, we have a federation. So everybody pays all these individual overhead costs. And there's a difference to these things. When all these countries pay overhead costs, it turns out that French artillery is better, American rocketry is better, German tanks and land equipment is. I mean, it's just funny, you know. Belgian rifles are better, right? British rock, you know. I mean, everybody produces. It just turned out that market produces more innovations, but it has to occur more gradually and incrementally by incentives. But the difference is also that group of people, because they're all defending their own sovereignty, have maintained moral conviction. in their defense. And that's not the same if you have an empire. In an empire, people don't maintain. I'm tying this back to what you said, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I'm getting there.
Right. So what happens is in an empire, you lose moral conviction, even though you get the ability to do standards of weights and measures and monetary processes and laws and stuff like that. It doesn't mean the people in them change their desire for autonomy and whatever. So empires usually break into collapses, or they divide it into what happens in Europe is federations.
So it brings us back to this question of it's an amoral function. The empire is amoral.
I don't know. You know, it's a
Because
trade-off.
the
It's a trade-off.
empire is amoral and is willing to sacrifice your tribe to further its ambitions. And it's like it will lie and say that those people are evil, therefore you have to kill them.
Yes. Whereas in the Federation, we have to maintain duty and order instead of good and evil, because you have to be able to reconcile, right? We have to tolerate different. So the point I'm trying to make it is you have the massive humanity as tribes, you consolidate into states, then into empires, then you break from empires once they're evolved enough into federations. The federation is the optimum strategy. It's a market, right?
So you're suggesting the let's say post-USA state devolves from a multinational empire into a proper federation.
Correct. It goes back to being a federation of states.
We federate with the Europeans when they get tired of being a multinational empire.
Well, say that again.
We can federate with the Europeans when they get tired of being a multinational empire. They're just a vassal state of the United States empire at this point.
Well, yeah, the problem is that France and Russia both want to dominate, and Germany's lost the will. The problem is Germany doesn't want the power, which is exactly why you want them to have it. Right? Or in a federation, what you want is nobody to want the power, but the French want the power because of their egos, and the Russians want the power because partly because they feel as an outcast, they feel they've been treated unjustly, and partly because they have a real fucking problem of managing 11 time zones with all those goddamn minorities in it, with a population and an economy that's too small to hold it. So we should be helping the Russians with their problem, and they should be helping us with our woke problem, right? The French, unfortunately, are incorrigible. I mean, I love the data that came back this week. Is that there is no French people; they're all German. They just speak a gutter version of the German language. Wasn't that fucking awesome? You speak a gutter language of
gutter German. Oh my!
Right, because it's a Creole, it's a mixture of Latin and German, so it's a gutter German. And so, of course, they are. So I love that, and that only goes on to my joy at seeing that the French have prohibited some of this genetic testing. First of all, because philandering is so popular in French society that they don't want the family to come apart with knowledge of the fact of how many French are
outlanders.
Their fathers are not who they pretend them to be, and secondly, because this is so, I just love this. You actually can't tell the difference between in the English. I mean, the Southern,
yeah,
English, the Northern French, the Belgian, the Lowland people, the Netherlands, and the Danes, and you can't tell the fucking difference.
Northern Germans,
right? I mean, why can't you tell the difference? Because the North Sea's a fucking pond, right? I mean, and
it's a highway.
This is the goddamn highway. So the French are pissed off because they're like, "Vive la France!" You know, I mean, I'm like, why? You guys fucked it up when you killed your monarchy, and then you killed your monarchy, you killed your middle class, and you killed your aristocracy, and then you killed the aristocracy of the German core of Europe, and they came out and want to take it out on you for having done it, and you managed to position it as them being evil when they were right. You know, well, at least in World War One they were right. In World War II was just a continuation, but you know, originally the Germans were right. They had the highest, most developed civilization in Europe, and France was the most backward government in Europe when they had their. So I like to shit on the French because they deserve every bit of it. But I love showing the genetics now. Is the French are Germans. There's no French people. They're a Germanic people. But
Yeah,
there's a little more you know, there's the gradient from Spain to Finland or North Russia, the gradient of steppe ancestry, all right, versus Neolithic farmer steppe was still there, but the anyway. So I just thought that was so that's still so. But I mean, and the reality is that that Europe is German, and the French are just gutter Germans. And I just really find that
it's just the lowest of the low blows.
it's just a
For
joy
the French to say that to the French is just you're not even real.
Yeah. Well, you know, you get
It's an illusion.
the Jews are somewhat, the Ashkenazi Jews are somewhat proud of their ghetto. What's the language?
Oh, they're German.
What do they say? They speak
Yiddish.
Yiddish. It's gutter German, right? I mean, it's a gutter.
Yeah.
Which is, and they're like proud of it, right? I mean, well, you said with the French, you can be proud of your gutter German French too. I mean, it's a gutter German language. It's effeminate. It means you're all
Oh my.
effeminate, and that's why you can't fucking fight a war to save your souls. But you know, okay, well, you're just Germans. Anyway, I love shitting on the. I mean, I'm half French, but I mean, but that doesn't mean anything because being half French just means that you're indistinguishable from an English.
You're still English.
We all just get rid of them.
No, even the French are half French.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
Oh my.
Anyway, I get a lot of positive result. I don't know why this happens, but I get all this positive feedback whenever I crap on the French. I think it's because American males view the French as traitorous, because they're always.
Maybe I don't know. No, it's kind of like this. It's like the French. We go back to the French Revolution. The French Revolution was that they did the same thing. They did this imperial thing. They did the feminine way of warfare in France.
Yep.
And it was to the finish. They wiped out their patriarchy.
And they have never recovered.
And they have no need to recover, apparently.
Yeah.
They have not hit bottom yet.
Well,
right?
you know, they're in the single digit minority status, and we're not, right? So they're getting more upset about it than we were, but they're getting more upset about it than we are because they haven't had this long tradition of slavery, guilt over slavery, Christian activism, whatever. So, you know, we're seeing nationalism rise over there in response to hostile immigration. I don't know if it'll work, but we'll see. We kicked the Muslims out of Spain. I'm not sure why, and if we hadn't stopped the Russians, they would have kicked them out of. They would have kicked the Muslims out of old Europe. I mean, the Balkans. So I mean, there's no reason we can't kick any hostiles out. And I'm in the well. If they're not hostiles, they're not a problem. So I don't. As long as they're fully integrated, I don't give a shit, right? I mean, but
that's right.
Some people do.
Right.
I mean, I completely respect the people that want to live in, you know, a homogenous German or English or Scandinavian or whatever, you know,
right.
whatever Latin aspect of their society. I completely respect that. I'd like to live amongst Scandinavians or myself. But that's different from saying I have a problem with people who are willing to fully integrate kind of like fully integrated black men, to be honest with you, because they say the honest shit that our lower classes used to. You used to be able to get really honest words,
straight words,
straight
right?
talk out of our working class, and you can't do it anymore. And I love that the black men are doing it. It fucking kills me. I mean, these guys are hysterical. I mean, they're just lay it all out there.
So
Like,
it's like the vision I'm getting here is what the post-imperial United States looks like.
well, we've written the recipe for it, right? We've said how to do it, how to organize it, how to build the constitutions for it, what the federal government needs to look like to do it. I mean, the only problem is the left wants their Leninist,
Yes,
and
they're going to get it for 2 more years.
okay, I can't. I'm not ready to switch topics there yet.
Oh, well, I'm
So-
not trying to say that, but
Okay.
I'm not trying to switch topics.
Okay, no, I'm preventing myself from running.
Oh,
away,
you're stopping your own switchery.
stopping my own tendency to run away with your lovely little insights. So in the sense that, yeah, we know. I mean, they built See, this is the problem. Without history, our history is focused on the Enlightenment because they're trying to justify it, and that
Justify the Enlightenment.
and they're trying to demonize monarchy still and justify the Enlightenment. They're trying to lionize democracy and the Enlightenment. The
Right.
problem is that that's okay if you took the English and German model, but it's not okay if you take the French model. The problem is the French model was academically more interesting because it's more utopian, just like the communist model was more interesting, academically interesting because it's more utopian. But because in the French model and in the communist model, these are French authoritarian and Russian authoritarian. These violate the Germanic principle of individual responsibility in order to produce a clerisy or authoritarian class that rules, right? And deprives people of opportunity. These are both intrinsically the feminine on the French side and the hyper-masculine on the other side. It's masculine low trust and feminine low trust. They're both low trust. They're just French feminine low trust and Russian masculine low trust, right? So in the Germanic civilization, we're high trust. So we forget that England is just a branch of it's West Germanic civilization, right? It's a wing of Western, just like the North Germanic civilization, Scandinavian. So you get down there into Italy, northern Italy, which is the Po Valley. It's southern Germanic, and then you go over into what used to be Prussia, right? And it's East Germanic. But I mean, fundamentally, Europe's a Germanic civilization, despite that the French are feminine. I almost said the F.
It was very close.
So anyway, so we forget that England and the United Kingdom were a part of Germanic civilization right until 1830. And after 1830, what happens is they become more interested as a global naval power, an empire, than they are as another member of as the island member of the Germanic continental civilization. They bifurcate, but until then. But 1830 is after the formation of the United States. So the United States is formed in an imitation of the Holy Roman Empire, right? And its most mature expression in the English system of rule of law. And so the only problem was the French came along and did this bullshit, and Washington wouldn't take the fucking monarchy. That asshole had taken the fucking monarchy, we wouldn't have about 90% of these problems, but we did. And he thought he was being virtuous. Why? Because he was being Germanic, which is, I don't want to have power. The fact that it's like the vulnerability of that sovereignty issue is the same problem with the vulnerability of Christian universalism, right? We have this vulnerability both at the aristocratic level, because I don't want, right? I have power only because everybody's worse than me, right? And then it's a via negativa power. And then the Christian ethic is, well, you exhaust Christian love with tolerance. Well, the problem is you need to be fucking intolerant Christian at the point which somebody's irredeemable, and they're irredeemable when their group strategy is expressly to destroy you. The same thing for monarchy as well. You say you don't want to have power, but the reason to have power is to prevent other people from having power. In other words, that's the purpose of the monarchy, is to deprive everyone of power. Because
that's a hard one to grasp.
right, I mean, and so okay, so when I say we teach the wrong shit, right?
We are in agreement.
Right, we're not teaching where our country came from, which is an imitation of the Germanic, right? The Holy Roman Empire, which was using the English West Germanic invention of the modern state, which was rule of law, right? In other words, they had the administrative utility, the Normans combined with the Anglo-Saxon tradition, etc. And the only real difference between the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons is the Normans use horses and the Anglo-Saxons didn't. That's the fucking right. And then because they had horses, then they'd been associated with Latin administration, so they brought that to England. But I mean, what's the difference? You can't fucking tell genetics, right? It's because we're all North Sea people. I can't tell my mother's pure French Breton from my father's, except that there's a tiny that my genetics on my father's side come out with a little more North Germanic, right? But I mean, it comes English North. Well, I mean, what's the difference between the Bretons and there's no fucking difference, right? Or the Normans, right? The Normans and the Bretons and the Southern.
That's right.
It's fucking nonsense. Anyway, so sorry, I made a profound point there, and I wanted to double down. So the United States. I'm trying to drag people through history so they can understand that the United States was built as a West Germanic civilization before the bifurcation of Germanic and Anglo civilization in 1830, right? And before the bifurcation of Anglo and American civilization after 18.
It's a rise of the British Empire as a naval power.
Correct. Versus
they but it reminds me of it rhymes with the Athenians, they chose to use their naval power, and then the capitalists took control of it.
Yes.
And generated opportunities to drive it in a direction that was off of its base.
Correct. So the Germans are Sparta, the British are Athens, and the Americans are Rome. And we repeated that.
Our Rome. Yeah. Yep.
We repeated the fucking process all over again. Right. And it's so stupidly obvious that the Spartans are the oldest version of Indo-European. That's the Spartan. When we think of the Spartans and their relationship to the other classes and how they ran their society, that's what we were actually like, right? That's what a European, or scale, trade scale. The Athenians are what happened when you start to scale, and the Romans when you succeed at scale.
Yes.
Right. And so that's what happened. The problem is each of these groups reached its limit. Yeah. And this is the problem with Europeanism. It's the same problem with Christianity and with aristocracy and with Rome and with Athens and with Sparta, is that you need to stay in your limits.
Everybody's got to know his limits.
And the reason, so it's this beautiful, horrible conflict between these three universalist tendencies, the universal military militia, right?
I like that it's trifunctional.
Well, you jumped ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I love it, right? The universal commerce, which is Athens, and the universal state, which is Rome, and it's just such a beautiful illustration of our history. But until you bring that forward and say, okay, America is Rome, and we've tried to build the Roman Empire again, and you fucking can't, because you need Europeans to develop and run Europeanism. Period. End of fucking story. Can other people be made Europeans? You can, if you do the same purging of the lower classes that we did, right? And you would fully indoctrinate them. But to say people are going to naturally develop into Europeanism when it's the most counterintuitive, emotionally, psychologically costly, and physically in that matter, because of your responsibility ends up being a physical burden, right? Because you have it, but whether you're a female running a household or a man serving in the military, you're running into the same fucking problem. Right? I mean, our women can run farms. I mean, our women have been running farms forever, right? They're not, that's why there's this weird equality in European civilization, is if you're going to have all the men form a professional military, the women are going to run the household and the farm and the animals. And so your women all of a sudden are just as valuable as your men. And so we have this weird tradition. I mean, the Romans make fun of it, right? Because the Greeks and the Romans reversed it, but the Spartans maintained it. Spartan women were very powerful, right? That's the natural state of our origins. So if you get back to your question, is what's the future? The future is, how do you go from empire, which is how you domesticate a continent, which we did, right? Then you go to multinational empire, which is where you bring in aliens like Rome did, and you expand your horizons behind the economic returns on it, which we have, right? Now you have to say, I have to break into federations, because economic computation, social computation, status pursuit, internal regulation is impossible. In other words, it can't be done anymore because you're not homogenous enough block.
Right. So it suggests to me that there's a self-sorting process will occur, which is we will move to be near people that are like we would like to be near.
Correct.
And away from those who are unlike, to optimize the neural economies at work.
Right. So you get into three state. Sorry, I want to cover one last point that's not obvious. So whereas the Spartans conquered their local peoples and serfed them, right?
Hellas.
Right, and serfed them, enslaved and serfed. Interesting line in Sparta.
It's like
it's technically enserfed, right? They had slaves, but those people weren't serfed, right? So that's a means of paying for your administration defense by capturing a population. The Athenians did it by noble families getting together and doing it with trade, right? And then trying to expand their trade routes and political control so they could generate more taxes. The Romans did the same thing. They built a massive trade network with extraordinary tax revenues. But the consequence of doing each of these things is you're raising the sub people out of, right? By making wealth for yourself, you're raising other people. Now that's less so for the Spartans, certainly more so for the Greeks, and way more so for the Romans. The problem for the Romans is policing the Mediterranean is cheap because you can use marines, because ships. But the minute you get to land, it's fucking hard. And Germans are motherfuckers. And so it's much more costly, right, to go up there. So that's one. So the problem is you can't make your costs of your revenue streams higher than their productions. But in the process, Rome did discover the common natural law, which is they didn't think of the law. They just looked at how people decided decisions and discovered what was in common.
Wait, the Romans did this?
Yeah, that's where their common law comes from.
Okay.
Is that they found out what is in common. So if your tribe and my tribe have a conflict, you decide it by what they have in common. And the more commonality you find, the more natural, in other words, the more empirical this means of dispute resolution is. And this is the equivalent of a weight and measure. It slowly improves having money, having weights and volumes, having standard track sizes, having common law creates predictability in trade by suppressing opportunity for reciprocity. So this domestication, but this act of domestication raises people up to where they want more, because they can get more. So we've raised the world up again. The problem is, I mean, Trump is right. We have to get back to America first. That's another way of saying it. We just can't afford this fucking anymore. Because our expenditures,
The business is, the balance sheet is out of whack.
the balance sheet is out of the whack and is burning our working and laboring classes, especially burning our white class, our white working classes. Because the problem, this is the problem, it's not obvious, is same thing for white suicides, is that it's very expensive to be a white person. They talk about it, they talk about it as privilege, but that's not true. It's incredibly emotionally, psychologically expensive to be white because you're bearing so much more responsibility than the other civilizations are. And I'm saying white as in civilization, not white as in skin color, even though
Like whiteness.
whiteness. Whiteness
Yeah.
is really expensive. So it's very hard for the unfit to adapt, to integrate into whiteness, because it forces you to bear responsibility at whatever the current economic and technological and social and political level is. And some people just can't do it. We've taken it and we've made subsistence farming impossible, all right, which we shouldn't have done. The Russians haven't, they've made it, they've retained it. The French have tried to retain it. So not subsistence farming, but at least maintain a lot of farming. When you have subsisting farming, you have somewhere for people who can't hack it to go. But what happened is we brought them into cities and we used them as serf labor in low-wage jobs where they're still vulnerable to the market instead of leaving them on farms. Well, they might be vulnerable to the market, but they're never going to, you know, at least today, you're not going to starve. So we did all these things to people, and you know the problem is people can't do whiteness. Try to tell a Muslim whose entire religion is based on abandoning responsibility, except for these narrow set of things
Rules,
for self
yep.
rules, right? For self and family. Now, and when they think of all these virtues that they think they're doing, what they're actually doing is evading responsibility for conflict management.
For conflict management.
Right, and so they're not solving the problem of the commons. Whereas whites, we do the inverse. We are all responsible for commons. Well, that's why white people are frustrated right now, is because we're being prevented from our traditional means of being responsible for the commons. And so the quality of the commons is declining, and therefore we're paying a high cost of norms without having the high benefit of norms. And so what other people are doing is basically stealing. Although that's what people who are non-conforming are stealing. So we have the template. The European template is traditional. It's federations, right? Where we have a ruling class whose job is to deny power, so the middle class can create so that the warrior class and the middle class can create trade, right? From which all the population prospers, and where dominance expression is not for yourself, not for the family, not for the clan, but for the commons. And we just don't think of it as an economic system where you're taking neural economy or effort and psychological capital, and you're putting it into an investment in a thing that lowers the cost of environmental capital for everyone. So the reason you want to live in a white society is your environmental cost, in other words, basically your trust is infinite. Whereas your trust in every other culture is not. Well, why does that trust exist? It exists because everybody is responsible for the commons, and you punish every person who violates not taking response. It's not only that you punish a person for violating.
It's an abrogation of duty.
You're punishing people for violating their duty of defense of the commons. This is why the universal militia concept. It's like everybody needs to be a Marine. You know what I mean? You know, I mean, just if you have that, you're going to get a high trust society. It's the same reason I've been lecturing this week on the sequence has to go from entrepreneurial warriors to rule of law to middle class society to a participatory government to social democracy. In other words, redistributive democracy. You have to follow that path, because if you don't, you haven't created the prerequisites for the next step, which is the trust necessary for each step. You can learn more about civilization in this conversation
Yes.
than you can in 4 years. I've been told this before. Whenever I
Yeah.
cover these arcs, I can learn more about civilization in one of these discussions than I can through 4 years of study or my whole.
But no, the issue is that it's interesting because it contextualizes all the bits. And it allows you to it's like what you geology, we will look at the like the magnetic orientation of all the rocks. And it's like you can't understand each one individually, but in the context you can understand them and what they're trying to tell you.
Right. So the reason we have a problem can be thought of a number of ways. Our ancestors who just killed all the men and captured all the women. The next version was the Spartans, and they conquered the people and then served men and women.
Okay.
The next version is the Greeks, where you get into, okay, we gotta increase our numbers while maintaining this equality between the families. And so they built trade, and that's important. It's the problem for Germany and Russia versus England, is that when you build warships, they serve as trade vehicles that rapidly discount trade during times of peace. But standing armies don't. On the other hand, if you don't produce either a navy or a military, you're not producing investment in the commons. So just like the reason somebody stays in a cult is the cost of getting in. The reason somebody stays in a religion is the cost, the sunk cost. The reason somebody stays in a society or societal norms is sunk cost, right? Well, what military does, it makes a sunk cost, right?
Yes.
And it's a non-fictional sunk cost. In other words, it's not like we're creating some hallucination. The second thing is, which epistemology is closest to nature of military, commercial, theological cult? It's military, right? So military will produce natural law. A military, in the absence of authority, will produce natural law. And that's the trick, is that we don't have authority. We developed contractualism, which is where all the warriors, so there was all the people responsible, all the shareholders, choose a president, in other words, a chieftain, whatever. And if that chieftain fails, they kill him pretty often, actually. Our history doesn't include that part.
No.
Or if you fail, you die.
Don't talk about that.
We don't talk about the kings that are dead, right? Because they are dead. And they're not thought about because
we're not remembering those guys.
Not remembering those guys.
Yeah.
And the only capital crime is cowardice in battle. Oh, that and adultery. Why? Adultery undermines the loyalty and the duty of the team to each other. So these are only two capital crimes. Everything else is just restitution. In other words, men are going to fight. Well, you got to pay for your fights. So we developed this thing where this very weird society, which is contractual, which doesn't really have authority. It has decidability. I think that's an important distinction. Whereas every other civilization has authority, our monarchs had decidability. So they can't just issue commands. Right? That's what an emperor does, right? But we have
That's right.
Kings and monarchs. King being pre-church and monarch being post-church. Right? Does this make sense? What am I touching on here?
No, it's just I just got upset because I thought of the crowd that has gained control of Western civilization. They have to lose, and it's like it's our duty to hang them.
Well, I mean, this is the question, right? I'm like, there's a spectrum of choices available. I'm a libertarian right? And I recognize that is my bias.
Right, it's a bias.
Right? It's a bias. So I'm always going to try to do what resolves a conflict. Right? That's just my nature, which is why I pursue the truth, because it's a means of peacefully resolving conflicts. So I admit I have a bias. But if you ask me a different question, what's best for man? It's to hang them all. Right? And probably worse. I mean,
I understand. I know you have to punish them for future.
You need to punish them visibly.
Right.
So there's the Eli faction, right, which is I think
Yeah, right. I know what that means.
Yeah, the Eli faction is the guys who make fun of this, but they really are serious, which is we just need skull pyramids. They're
Right.
actually right.
Because it serves as a clear sign to all future generations how this works.
You're trying to do is create a lesson in history by which no one in mankind dares to step over that line of authority again. And especially Leninist authority, which is
We understand it.
And so that would be the moral thing to do. The purely reciprocal thing to do, not immoral, is to separate. But you've
let them make their own skull pyramids.
Well, the problem is they will always be a threat. It's like leaving barbarians at the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing by showing their failure, the problem with India has today, right? They just can't handle truth, right? They can't handle the truth that it's the Aryans were an invasion rather than out of India. They can't handle the truth that they were conquered by everybody because their traditional model is too weak. Their state model is too weak. They can't handle the reality that they froze because the caste system, while it helps the top, freezes the economy by prohibiting rotation. Right. They can't handle the truth that the British bringing realism and science and law is what made it possible for them to become a great power rather than Africa. Right? So they can't handle that truth. Right? So the problem is people will resist a truth. And the problem with the left is because they're Abrahamic, in other words, they argue their strategy is Semitic and feminine, is they will never stop trying to kill you because you're proof of their failure. So this is what the feminine method of warfare, the Abrahamic, the Leninist method of warfare, is to create sedition from within against merit, right? Because they're dysgenic. So their strategy is dysgenia through sedition against merit in favor of what they call equality, but which is really degeneracy. So it's like I talk to them and like, you have a moral ambition, but it's not achievable by the immoral means you believe are moral. I mean, I was talking to some lefty guy the other day just to see if I could reach him, and I could. Why? Because he's actually moral. He's just wrong about how to get there, but he's actually moral. And so there's a lot of people on the left who are actually moral.
Just elucidate that a little bit, please.
Wanting the world to be equally beneficial for everyone is not immoral.
That's right.
It's
idealistic.
Right. And it will come down to I have faith in human nature. Well, but you have faith in it, but the evidence is quite the opposite, is that man is immoral. When man is amoral and chooses immorality and morality as he can get away with.
Right.
Right. So the morality is more expensive, which is why we call it moral, and immorality is less expensive. Right? The only way to prohibit immorality is to make it more costly than morality. And so that's what we do through criminalization and institutions and habituals, norms and traditions and values and education and indoctrination, and just make it more expensive. I lost my train. You wanted me to cover what was
while you were talking about, you were saying that the leftist is moral.
In other words, there are angry leftists and loving leftists.
Right.
And they're very easy to distinguish. So
yes.
You have, and it's basically the neurotic and the non-neurotic spectrum. So if you get the neurotics, they see it as oppression, right? And they're hateful. But that's just right. They're hateful because they can't systematize well. They can't even imagine that all we do here is reflect nature's laws, right? They can't imagine that, so they personalize the laws of
You have to
nature
believe that you're oppressing them.
rather than following the laws of nature in order to protect all of us from them. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? But by being moral, by being whiteness, we're protecting mankind from the left. But on that left, there's two factions.
Okay.
The people who are immoral, in other words, they view themselves as oppressed, and the people who are moral, who merely care and are frustrated. And so you can reach the moral people on the left, right?
Right.
As long as they understand that there's always going to be a hierarchy and it's always going to work this way, but we can maximize it if we do these things. In other
Right.
words, there's a point at which you're evolving so fast that you're leaving behind generations. There's a point at which you're evolving at the rate at which your generations aren't being left behind. And the way you solve that is you make sure the generations at the bottom don't get bigger. I mean, it's just math, right? I mean,
It's just math.
it's just math.
It's just
So
physics.
does that
math.
mean does that mean you don't care about the generations at the bottom? No. It means that you don't expand their population beyond what is possible to carry at the current rate of production under the current systems of organization. And that's like saying you can't have more kids than your farm can feed. It's no more
It
complicated.
doesn't work.
And the problem they get into is they see a billionaire
Yes.
say, okay, I have $1 billion and I'm going to give this to Americans, which is 300, let's just say 300 million.
Yeah.
So each of us gets what, $3?
$30.
$30, $3. Okay, how big a difference is $30 going to make? Not going to make
None.
But if I take that $1 billion and I invest it in something like converting electric vehicles, right? Or what's that new leaching process they just came out with for rare earth minerals that dramatically reduces the pollution runoff and recycles it. Or I spend billions of dollars on nuclear reactors because nuclear fuel, if we're not lazy about it, is infinitely recyclable. I mean,
right.
It only stops being useful when it's glass, right? I mean, you can just keep refining it forever, right? Until it's gone. Listen, there's 200 years, there's 10,000 years or something. There's a limited amount of radiation available on Earth. I know, but there's a limited amount of petroleum too. The difference is we can go find more radiation in the world, in the universe, and we have to cook oil. Right? It's just we're burning up 100 million years worth of trees right now, or I mean, decaying trees. I mean, at an enormous rate. So if that $1 billion is put to those ends, which is more effective than putting it to giving everybody $30, which is going to buy a pizza? I mean, it's not going to make any difference at all. You have $300 billion, right? I mean, you take 300, right? I mean, it's just like, well, you still, even if you give that $300 billion to all these Americans, it's what does that end up with? It ends up with a few $1,000s, right? What's going to happen to you? You're just going to blow it on pizza and beer anyway. Yet that $300 billion, when concentrated, is the same thing with government. Right? Governments are actually weak, but you give them a lot of money, you concentrate it a lot, so they can concentrate on specific problems. The big problem, of course, is behavior. And the big benefit is education. If you put, education, behavior, and institutions together, with law, you all of a sudden get, the ability to cooperate at large scale, and everything gets cheaper. But if you're like the West and you say, okay, not only do you have that suppression of behavior, but we're going to require duty from you. In other words, not only are you prohibited from the immoral, but we're going to require you to do the moral.
Yeah.
And require you to do the moral is doing your duty. Well, what's the difference in duty between African, Middle Eastern, Indian, and Chinese civilization? Well, I mean, duty in this country is fucking, in the Germanic civilization, is fucking brutal. There's a lot of it. And so if you sit there in Germanic civilization and you're doing okay, it's fine. But if you're in Germanic civilization and you're being asked to do duty and you're being left behind, then it becomes a problem. And so that's why you have to maintain this relationship between the people who are being left behind and the growth. And this is the only way to do that is to maximize growth, right, within the limits of your leaving your people behind, right? And we do a pretty good job of it. I mean, we do a better job than anybody else has.
All right, so keeping the trailing side of the curve from falling off.
Yep. Is a matter of just suppressing reproduction.
Falling off the wagon. And it's like the interesting function of it is this is so it goes to this. I'm thinking of the leftists. There's the two kinds of leftists: the frustrated, caring, and the angry, dangerous ones. And it's like this. So you ever been around the Irish Wolfhound?
Of course, love them.
Everybody loves them because they're so nice. Because we had to kill all the mean ones. They're so damn dangerous. It's like this. I was bossing the horses around, right? I'm riding horses, and I'm bossing the horse around, and it's like they're very nice. They're very nice, and they accept commands, and they just do what they're told to do, except when they get nervous, right? But it's like they're not mean.
No, they're wonderful.
You don't have any mean ones.
Although I got to tell you something, I have been shopping for horses, right?
Okay.
Fancy horses, right? You know,
right.
$100,000 to $500,000 horses, and that involves traveling around the world with horse farms. And I will tell you that despite the fact that I know quite a bit about horses, I've had them, right?
Right.
And I'm kind of fond of draft horses because they're big,
yeah.
scary monsters, right? But they're actually kittens, right? They don't have to. It's like the guys who are 6'5" and 300
Right.
pounds. They don't have to be tough, right? So I've gone out and sat in a field with draft horses and with some carrots and just fed them. Okay, but if you do that with fancy horses,
they're crazy.
They're excitable. Shit, I gotta get out of here because there's 70 horses around me. All want this carrot really bad, and I'm like, I'm vastly outnumbered and way outweighed and terribly strong. Throw the carrots up in the air, go leap over the fence.
Split.
So yeah, I mean, it depends on they're like dogs. Like you have one dog, they're wonderful. 2 dogs, they can get excited. 3 dogs, you got to pack and it's fucking over. Right? I mean, you've got to train 3 dogs, right, to make sure you're the leader. Because like if you feed a single dog, you're gonna, unless it's one of those little rat dogs that doesn't get abused at all, right? But when you're talking about horses, they're gregarious as hell, right? But I mean, they're also, when they get, there's no filter on between.
They're excitable,
right? There's no filter there. So your whole thing is, how do I keep you calm and trusting me? And they actually like it. It's strange, but they like it when they can trust you. And they've just got to worry about their feet. You think you brought this up. They have to worry about their feet.
Yeah.
Right. And once you're worried about this other stuff, right? And they can trust you, they're awesome. They're like fucking golden retrievers. The problem is a golden retriever, I love golden retrievers. They bark like they're like 800 pounds.
Yeah.
And then they run away. Anyway, so I got off track.
I was a side tour, but it's like that. So the issue is that if there's a natural fracture point, like a cleavage plane in the left, it's the moral versus the immoral ones. That's an interesting data point.
There are plenty, and you can tell it's the neurotics, the neurotic, narcissistic, externalizing, which is the female behavior, versus the male behavior on the left. And they're calm. They just think it would be right. And they think they believe the world is set up immorally. I'm like, well,
Okay.
it's not set up. I mean, it might
But they're
look,
amenable to reason, it sounds like.
well, you can talk to them, Mike. And so the problem I'm like many times, I'm actually trying to make a point that ties back to your original statement, which takes me
Thank
20
you.
minutes to walk through the archive. It's not that we have to kill them all, so to speak, right? There are good left-wing people, right?
That's
They're
right.
just wrong about how to get there because you can't get there from here, right? I mean, you just can't do it. Looking as my main family members, you can't get there from here.
Right.
You can't get there from here. You might think you can, because it'd be nice if everybody was like you, but you
And
know
they're
what?
not.
They're not. And here's how I look at it. I'm gonna protect you from people like me. Because if I wasn't a nice moral person raised in the Catholic Church, I don't see the world you do. I understand how easy it is to be a
But then
snob, or it's not even hard. And you know what? It's fun. It's rewarding. So I want to protect you and your naivety. I want you to have the privilege of believing people like you that are like you, because you're unaware that there are people like me. Right? And that's my job. That's noblesse oblige.
that's right.
Right? And if you can believe silly things, it's like when they criticize Muslims criticize our women. I'm like, that's a demonstration of our men. Because we don't fucking care. I mean, what are you gonna do? Right? And so it's the same thing here, is that I want to give you the luxury of folly. But to do that, I have to prevent you from ever being in control.
Oh, it's absolutely necessary, because this foolishness is odd extremum.
Right.
It's to the limits of tolerability, and that limit is drawn. This is interesting. The limit is drawn at the moral outrage of the left when they demonstrate their moral outrage, and that's the immoral one. He's saying that you're evil, not that you're wrong.
That's right. Thank you.
So how about that?
No, you tied it together.
That was kind of interesting.
If you're willing to tell me I'm wrong, I can negotiate with you. But if you say I'm evil, then I have to.
Irreconcilable.
It's irreconcilable. And the problem is, if you're evil, you call me evil, and it's because you're neurotic, it means you're unfixable.
You're dangerous.
Right? You're dangerous. So the problem is, so when we say we've got to take care of the left, it's actually, we know who those people are, right? They're the people who are intellectual, activist left, who claim through neuroses that they're oppressed and that they should be in control, right? Those people are evil. The people
narcissistic, authoritarian, moralizing liars.
Well, do they? I don't. I know they're dishonest. I don't even know if they're. I mean, they're not reciprocal, right? We know, right? The left is, and I say, how can they be if they can't even be intellectually consistent? In other words, if they're emotionally consistent, but they can't be intellectually consistent or morologically consistent, then they can't be reciprocally consistent. It's not possible for them. They're just emotion machines with words attached, right? So because that's why.
Wait! Dangerous ones with edges.
Right. So I mean, if you say, what do we have to fix? I'm like, well, I mean, you have to. Those people have to be culled one way or the other. Right. And so, but how many of them are there? Is it 3%?
That's right.
5%? 10%? How many of the people just don't know any better or believe that's possible? I mean, half of these women that you listen to on the left, or these single women, they're just following the herd. Doesn't mean they're irredeemable, and some of them are, because neuroticism is the feminine cognition, the neuroticism, the interpretation of the externalization. That's all female behavior, and it's. I mean, that may be unfixable.
But in an evolutionary sense, they're self-culling.
Well, they're certainly self-culling because they're not having any kids.
Evolutionarily dead end.
The problem is they're dragging us down with them, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get back to your question.
Yes.
Please repeat what you said again. Evil versus,
We're talking about the cleavage plane between the moral and the immoral leftists.
right. So the difference is, there are moral people and you can negotiate with them because they're not. The difference is disagreement. I mean, I don't disagree with the left. In other words, yeah, we need to fix this fucking problem. I disagree with how it can be solved. If you think we're ever going to be equal, it's not going to happen. It can't. It'd be the worst possible thing. If you think that we can't leave people behind, now that's solvable, right? That's a solvable problem. If we treat everybody with respect, that's solvable.
Right.
Done it. We know we can do it because we've done it, right? So but if you're on the left, that thinks that the male strategy, the correspondence with reality, is evil, and that you need to have power, then those people are irredeemable, right? Because it's irreconcilable, and because the female method of warfare never stops. Women will hold a grudge indefinitely. They never get out of it. So if you've got that mindset, I mean, what do we do with you? Well, I mean, the problem we've had with even other religions is that people can hide it for generations. So, I mean, I don't know. So and in other words, in the sense that you actually originally asked the question, we can solve the problem at the present and simply separate by devolving the federal government into, and that's really easy. We'd end up with X blue cities and Y red territories.
Yes.
And they would be about the same population, but the reds could prevent the blues from invading by having a standard of behavior in the red conservative society that is such that it'd be intolerable for the left to enter into it. Does that mean they wouldn't try? No. What would happen, of course, is that people would make the rational choice. Now, the people who are in the moral, people who are in the moral middle, right? They just want it to work. They'll move to the red spaces, and the left cities will continue to turn into the favelas like the rest of the world, which is fine, right? I mean, I don't see the problem with it. On the other hand, if you say that they're never going to stop, right, and strategically, for the benefit of ourselves, our progeny, and for all mankind, for all eternity, we are better off eliminating those people in a war. That's actually true. I just don't know if I would. I mean, in humorous terms, in intellectual terms, I can understand it. But wiping out a third of the, 3% of the population, that's probably somewhere between 3 and 10 of the population, which will shrink rapidly, by the way, once you the minute you start taking action, that percentage decreases rapidly, because a lot of it's just self-interest, right? They're producing self-interest. But if you take away their ability to be in at the academy, in public office, all right, you take away their right for free speech. I mean, that's going to change the problem. So my point is, we can win. Winning is easy. Whether we choose to purge them, like we have purged the Muslims in Spain or whatever, or the Cathars, was the Cathars?
Yeah.
The purges are very easy to do, and there's not a problem at all, right? I mean, government talks about it like we can't do it, it's a problem. It'd be terribly easy to do. I mean, if you just said, I'll give $1,000 a head, it'd be done in a weekend, right? I mean, it'd be messy, but it'd be done in a weekend. And then, but so it's really easy to do a purge like that. And you don't have to do it like putting people in camps. You just say you have this much time to leave the country and find somewhere else to go, and they'll go. Maybe they'll go to Canada. Canada's anyway. So this is so what that choice. Excuse me. That choice isn't mine to make.
Right.
Just lay out the menu. We can die. We can separate. We can defeat. Whatever you guys want to do, that's fine. That's not my job. If you want to know how to separate, I know how to do that. And although I've promised the FBI I won't talk about it, I know how to.
Right.
And I absolutely positively do, or they wouldn't have quoted me a lot of the things I read, including the maps I drew. So, I'm not gonna,
But it's
Any-
beyond it.
any special forces guy of captain level or higher, right? Probably just captains, knows how to take over the United States with a small number of men. It's completely trivial to do if those men do what they're told. But that's one way. The best way is my way, which is show up and do what our ancestors did, which is completely legal. File a common lawsuit against the state for the redress of grievances because they violated the rights of Englishmen, which is the common natural law of European peoples. So I want to do it the nice way. But my attitude is, if you try the nice way and they don't give you the nice way, I did my fucking duty as a moral
That's right.
citizen. And if the boys want to complete the job, it's not difficult because there aren't that many of them. Anyway, did I cover my?
I think that covers it.
It's really easy to devolve back to the German, where you have Italians and Spanish and French and Poles. And well, we have the same thing in America. We have the 9 nations or the 11 nations of America. We definitely have a black nation.
Yes.
Definitely have a Hispanic nation. They're at this point relatively territorially aligned. Some shift don't matter. We definitely have a New England nation, which I'm very disappointed by because my ancestors appear to be the dumbest of all fucks. Excuse me. And we have a Germanic nation, right? And I'm not really sure it's so much my English problem. It might be the Italian and Irish in New England, but cost more of it. And the fact that but anyway, so we have these nations and we're organized by economies, by rivers, whatever. We've already mapped this out. And if you say instead of having states be responsible, because pretty much all the states are bankrupt except for, I think, Texas.
Huh.
You just say the states don't matter anymore. You can form whatever states you want. We sort of
Counties.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's either counties or districts. I'm not really sure because the districts have been so effectively gerrymandered that they actually represent states. There's microstates.
Hmm.
In other words, I'm not sure what we're doing is bad. I mean, if you end up with these little microstates, you end up with the German princedoms, and then you right, and whether they're then you just reorganize county lines and you have county governments, right? But you know, the more states, the better, right? The problem is then you have to, when you have the more states, the better, you have to get rid of the Senate and have the governors be a substitute for the Senate. We don't need the Senate anymore for it. But you know, there might be, if you want to say, okay, we need to have, we want to leave the House as the Commons. We want the Senate to turn into the House of Industry, right? And then we want to have the House of Lords, which is basically the House of Governors. That would be fine too, because now you get the whole freaking spectrum. Because because you'd have local interests, global interests in commerce, and state interest in states, and you'd probably have a nice balance. And as long as the church, we can fix the church like you and I have been discussing, so that it actually teaches education again. So you get a proper Catholic education like I did, which is fucking horrible. Nice. It's horrible, and for me to recognize the truth of that, it took a lot because I don't want to believe it. But it turns out that what's the church teaching you? Natural law. That's all it's teaching you. It's using a lot of bullshit to do it. But you know, I got to tell you, if I have to choose between being taught by brothers and school teachers, I'm going to be taught by Xaverian brothers. They were fucking awesome. Why? Because they're teaching natural law.
Yeah.
Anyway, I sort of went on my arc there, tied it around. So did we bring it all together?
I thought it was well done. Got a good roving picture of Western history from the beginning almost, and narrowed it down to a focus of the current moment and what's going to happen next.
when we say it's all economics, it really is. It's just you got to include neural economy, behavior,
Yes,
neural economy, behavioral economy, a normative economy, a political economy, and commercial economy. You have to include all those things because neural economy is a lot of where all this bias comes from, and it turns out it's really expensive to reprogram people if they get bad software.
that's right.
One of the things that's bothering me is the Muslims are trying to mass convert Hindus. And this is a thing in India. And I'm like, India is probably the one religion we should leave alone. I mean, absolutely the right religion is the ancestor. The remaining non-false religion is Shinto, which is ancestor worship, right? But the remaining Indo-European religion that's not crazy is Hinduism. It's fucking brilliant. I mean, it really is. I mean, there's a God for everything. Right? I mean, there's basically a prototype for everybody in society, maybe 3.
Right.
Right. And so it's like the best because prototypes, people, right?
Yeah.
It's by imitation. It's the thing we understand the most.
Right.
Right?
It gives you
Empathy and sympathy.
the template for behavior for your type.
It's the least abstract way of teaching people is polytheism. I'm not even calling it polytheism. It's more like pagan. I don't know. It's something else, right? But it's more like it's mythicism, right? It's
Yep.
And so you have every class, every class, every caste, right? They have this like in every region. They've got all these just like Europeans used to have, right?
Right.
All these, except they have way more, and it's way more elaborate. So you have this thing, and I used to think, I like the saints. Like my mother was devoted her life to Saint Jude, right? Which is interesting. She's a woman, so patron saint of lost causes, which I think is fucking hysterical, right? So she's looking out for the weak, right?
Huh.
Crispin, Saint Crispin is a god for tailors, a saint for tailors.
Yeah.
So our saints method was just about as good, but that was because we also had our heroes. We had our Alexanders, right? And we also had our other heroes. We have our Socrates and Plato, and so we have this pantheon to choose from. And so when I tell people, the reason you can study the Bible is because it's simple. But if you want to study the what they call the Western tradition, our pantheon is fucking crazy, right? I mean, it's all these goddamn people, right? It's this huge pantheon, and then moreover, it's trifunctional. So you have the philosophical, the theological, and the martial and the empirical, right? You have these, and so it's like you have this whole freaking spectrum to choose from, and you can bias it whatever way you want. The Hindu's kind of interesting because it doesn't take over those problems because it's caste based. So trifunctionalism is sort of embedded in it, but it's not persistent. I think that's really fascinating.
Yep.
Whereas, in the Japanese system, they have sort of this Buddhism. They tried to impose Buddhism, like, I don't know how many times before it stuck, right? They have Shintoism. Buddhism intends to be the unifying, the political religion, right? But it didn't stick. So they have the optimum religion, which is the family, the nation, which is headed by the emperor. Right? You have the ancestors, which is the past, and then you have this political religion, this Buddhism, which is it's not that, it's like ethics, right? And they have some of the Confucian stuff as well. So they've got this beautiful structure over there. What I like about it is I can't claim any of it's false. Right? It's not even structured to be false. I mean, Buddhism is really pseudoscience, right? I mean, it started out as a philosophy and ended up as a supernatural thing, but I don't know. It's all fascinating. It's like Christianity is Christianity can be reduced to a science, and it turns out it's true, right? But it's all the wrappers around it, the churchianity, that is the I object to, not the Christianity. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent there. I know you have another subject.
I don't.
We had one, we had the election. We didn't touch
Right.
the election. And you briefly touched on it. And my question on the election, which I've posed with others, is
What's that?
there's so many.
It has to do with the to me, the amount of the amount of doubling down that is going on is there is larger than I anticipated,
Yes.
which is I was too optimistic about how smart the people were about figuring out what's going on and rectifying the situation to the best of their ability by political means. And it's like, apparently they haven't learned their lessons because they have a normalcy bias.
So a bunch of things come out of this. I thought it was, first of all, it's what I expected. In other words, when I said to you earlier, I don't see it. I mean, I have to count on you guys
We do our best.
because I look at it and I'm like, I don't see a red wave. I don't see. And there's reasons for that, but I just didn't see it, and so it didn't materialize as I expected. So there's a couple of things that happen though. Are we at we need to give up point yet? So, for example, one of the things I saw emerge very quickly was the Republican Party is done, I think. Right, the neocon Republican Party.
Oh, I hope so.
And so they've got to get rid of McConnell, right? I mean, this has got to go. This guy's got to go. Right? I mean, this is just fuck.
They're breathing. It looks like they're breathing their last fumes.
Right. So we got to get rid of that. Oh, because neocon is originally Jewish, right? It's originally
Straussian.
It's Straussian and Trotsky, right? Rather than Leninist. It's Straussian and Trotsky. It's Jewish, and so they tried to bring in this globalism, and partly because it's tied. This is why I try to avoid this subject, but it's really Israelism, right? As a, what do they call it? Zionism, right? That's the reason the neocons took this globalist position. So you have the financial wing, the neocon wing. Libertarians are dead now. The Marxists are dead, but the race Marxists succeeded. They succeeded, interesting, by the Catholic method through Freire, which I think have to thank James Lindsay for helping me understand that, because I didn't see that Brazilian influence. And other people told me ahead of time, you're not looking at the Paulo Freire, right? And I said, I don't think I need to. I just see how this evolves naturally. But the identifying the actor and how he got into the academy specifically was a contribution that in my ignorance of Marxist dogma, I just hadn't. I mean, I just look at it as a computational problem, right? I mean, if you start out with the wrong premises, you're going to eventually lead to all the wrong conclusions, right? And so I just look at what markets are available, what institutions are available, how they're going to undermine each of those. I don't need to know who the actors are. I know that that's what's going to happen.
Right. It's an inevitable function. It's deterministic.
So to be able to identify the actor is useful because it adds more validity to any counter argument. So, oh shit, I lost my train of thought by going down there, Brad.
Paulo Freire.
Yeah, I know, but I forgot what I was. The reason. Oh, okay. So I'm saying, well, where is the population right now in the I give up stage? In other words, so to me, what I saw is that the data says that they have already made whites a minority, and because the whites voted conservatively. And still as a group, it would have been a conservative election. The non-whites didn't. They voted heavily Democratic. The only defectors among the whites were single women. But even with single women defectors, it was a conservative white vote. Right? So what happened though is that if you take the white single women and they defect with the minorities, you get a small majority. But since that's going to continue without the women being corrected somehow, we've passed the 50% point. So now the point I want to make is we can't win by political means any longer.
Ah.
And this is what I said would happen, right? So you're not going to be able to win this by persuasion, because you can't persuade a criminal to stop committing a crime, right, without the force to prevent the criminal from doing the crime, because the incentives are to continue the crime as long as possible.
Yep.
The second thing I said is that you can't achieve this end politically. And you can't achieve this end politically because we don't have the numbers, and we're never going to have the numbers again. And there's nothing to sell, because conservatism is expensive. Whiteness is expensive. It maximizes responsibility. It leaves people behind. And the people that are going to be left behind are single mothers and Black and Hispanic minorities, because of their class size difference, and they're still going to act as a group.
Okay.
So there's no political solution available.
Okay.
So there's no argument, there's no persuasive solution, and there's no political solution. In other words, democracy. That leaves us with court and uprising and war. So we've, as predicted, as I said, we've crossed out two options. Now, what's the chances they're going to win in court? With this court, I don't know. It's like if we get it before the court, it's 50-50.
Yeah, you may be. What I see as the likely outcome is that the court will devolve the what are rightfully political decisions to politics at a more local level, and that will naturally trend towards the dissolution of the United States as a centralizing authority.
Okay, so now it depends on the axis you take. So if you, I think what you might have assumed something there in what to bring before the court, but we have to, right? So remember, we have the court and then the Congress. So the court is what we bring suits before of within the established law.
Yes.
Thankfully, the court is restored. Thank you, God damn, thank you, Judge Scalia and Judge, who's the black guy again? Judge Clarence Thomas. And thank you, the Heritage Society. Not Heritage, Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation? No. What's the natural law group? I had something to eat. I've had coffee.
That's right. Just checklist.
The Federalist Society. Yeah. So thank you to the Federalist Society and the Republicans who have achieved through hard work the restoring rule of law in the court. Right? Okay. In other words, restoring rule of law, not rule of positive law, but rule of common, natural, concurrent law. Right? And so what you've seen is the courts say, well, you ignored, and I saw this in a judgment on the second in the appeals court in California yesterday, is that they've said, well, you ignored tradition and prose. In other words, you ignored the common law. You can't do that in the United States because anything that's been considered in the history is part of the common law. In other words, you can't play word games. That's what the left does, and that's what the left does with positive law, is to play word games. Whereas the court is saying these things are weights and measures. Those weights and measures were produced in a context, and you have to go back and say that these laws that were made were made in those contexts. So now you've got to deal with the context as well. So that's happening again. Thank God. Right. So we're having the courts are starting to behave like fucking courts again. So I have some belief. It depends on what we bring before the court. Hold on. And if I lose my train of thought, bring me back to what we have to bring before the court.
Yes, I will.
The second thing is we escalate to the Congress. And there's only one way to bring a suit to Congress, and that's by arms. In other words, the Congress is a court, but you bring a suit to Congress by arms. Why? Because we don't have a king to bring a suit to. That's why the king is so important. We don't have a monarchy. You can't bring a suit before the monarchy to adjudicate against the state. When
Right.
when the whole point of the monarchy is to deny power and to restore the law, the natural law, restore the law. In other words, the king is above the law and the restoration of the law. Now, thankfully, they still have that in England, right? The queen was above the law and the restoration law. Charles is above the law and the restoration law. Now, it says he's above the law, but the implication is in the restoration of the law. So the king can basically disband parliament, call up the army.
Right.
We don't have that because we have a president instead of a king. The president doesn't have, he can't do anything because he has no right to be above the law and the restoration of the law. So that means all we have left is Congress.
Okay.
And so our last, or the parliament, right, which is our Congresses, the parliament. And so we have to do is show up with force of arms for it. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to shoot anybody in parliament. It means that's the criteria for putting a case before the Congress. In other words, because the Congress can say, I'm not going to take this. Well, you have to remove their ability to say, I'm not going to take this into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you can negotiate with Congress for the remediation of differences, which is that's what our Declaration of Independence. It's a common law suit against the state. The difference is they could put it for a king, and they could blame the monarchy and the parliament for this bad judgment, right? Whereas we have no king, we have the court, but the court is bound by the Constitution, right? And the Constitution is fragile. So now, how do we solve this issue? Is it possible to follow what I'm saying so far?
Yes.
So the question is, what do we bring before the court? We have to bring before the court those holes in the Constitution that are prohibiting this problem. In other words, commonality, concurrency, what truth consists of, and most importantly, what religion consists of.
Ah.
And so the way you destroy this is a hostile, invasive religion, again, in violation of the natural common law, the concurrency of that law, and the Constitution to ensure the natural concurrent common law, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, commonality between us. So we have a hostile religion, and this hostile religion is taking possession of the state. And so we can defund, right?
Religion. Yep.
We can defund the religion in the academy, right? And not only, then the second thing is, these are acts of fraud. In other words, the second bar is higher standard, which is the false promise of this religion is an act of fraud that cannot be met because it violates the laws of nature.
Right.
Right. So the best that can be done is this alternative, put that before the court. Now, this is important because the court can actually make that decision. In other words, because we have reintroduced the common concurrent natural law, right? This is important. We've restored traditional law. We can now bring this case before the court. Now, so if we bring those issues before the court, it's possible to win that case, right? Will we win? I don't fucking know. But if we don't win, now we have permission,
right,
to go to Congress. And we show up with Congress before they go force of arms. Now, there's no king, so that's what we're left. And if the Congress doesn't do it, then we have to propose a settlement, which is the revisions to the Constitution, which is what I've spent most of my adult life working on, though it's in various stages of completeness, order, disorder.
It's emerging from chaos.
I mean, it's like I solved this. It's trying to say, okay, well, I got to solve every fucking problem. Okay, I might solve this.
It's a big job.
It's like, okay, I solved this one 80%. I can't solve that one until I solve that one 30%. I solved that one 30%, but I can't solve the 30% because I can't solve this one to 50%. Right? It's this fucking game of toggling between all these things that are interdependent, right? And so, people have to be quite bright to listen to you. You and I cover things like the law, right? I mean, we've covered it together in these things, right? But it's not like we can understand it. It is, you understand it, right? I mean, it's ascertainable, whatever. Right. But it's just huge, right? So we can put the suit and the remedy before the court, right? The suit is the declaration.
Right.
I call it declaration of reformation.
Right.
And we put the remedy, which is the constitutional reforms, before the court, before the Congress. The Congress is a choice to choose that or not. But what if you can't solve, you can't get your remedy? The only solution is war.
Yes.
My view is the process of taking this before the court and bringing it before the Congress will make the discussion public enough
Yes.
so that we don't have to have a civil war. Now, what's happened though is that because of this doubling down, left after Hillary doubled down, the time frame altered here. Because of my health, my time frame altered, right? And because I launched too early, and the right canceled me, right? The Lost Boys, right? I can't recreate that structure. But in the sense of, can we win this? It's absolutely possible. Can we win it to separate, devolve, which is the peaceful thing to do, or can we win it? Do we have to win it by force, which is the more durable answer at higher costs? Remember, no civilization really comes back from a civil war except the English and the Americans, right? That's because of our system of laws. Right? So we don't want to have a civil war,
Right.
especially one that's going to be like this, because if we have a civil war, it's going to be like the equivalent of the world wars, which is the European Civil War is going to bring out the world. Or if America has a civil war, because we're basically the substitute for the British Empire, all the shit going on in the world is going to blow up. So I see that as a benefit, as a leverage point. We can't have a civil war because the whole world's going to blow up. So let's just separate. The question is, where are the people in that? And like I said, I can see certain things like we're not going to have a red wave, but understanding where the people are, I just don't feel like I'm a very good judge of it until I see demonstrated behavior in something like a vote.
Right.
So did I make sense there?
That makes sense to me.
You don't have any comment on it?
There's not much to say. It's like, it sounds like a very reasonable chart.
So the piece I want to talk about that's questionable is I managed to make a few people understand how easy it was to win that civil war, and it made me get a target on my back.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I know the law well enough to know the difference between talking about something and organizing something. But the point is, there is a huge fleet of things. There is no way the right doesn't win. The point is, the right has to say that and be confident of it in order to bring the other side to the table so that it never has to happen. So the one thing I would like is for the right to unify on that. If we have to, we will. Because that's how we get to the table. And if we don't do that, they keep doing what they do, which is they undermine. And this is what I said they would do. I said, Trump's not going to win the election, and they're going to use their existing model to undermine their ability to cooperate at scale. And that's what they did, right? Canceling all over everything, deplatforming, whatever. So, right, using. So that's what they did. And so that's what their strategy is. So they will win by incremental undermining of individuals, like the prosecution of the January 6th guys, but not the Antifa guys, right? Right. So they will continue to organize the state, right, as a means to basically make sure the left wins.
Right.
So the way we have to do that is we just have to get the right to understand. The right, I don't mean the hard right. I just mean the middle and the middle 50%, right? We have to make the state understand that we are willing to do something about it. If we don't win in court, if we don't win before Congress, we have no choice there. And the thing is, what we're asking for by asking for devolution of the federal government to return control of the states is moral. You cannot deny the morality of that.
Right.
The restoration of our self-determination. If you do that in court and in Congress, then we are just in war. The difference is we're just in the nasty solution instead of the separation solution. Understand what I just said?
Yes. So I had an interesting conversation with a nice Christian patient.
Anyway, I know you like to do it, and I want to hear those. But
Yes.
the problem is if we don't summarize that for the audience, they don't catch it.
I understand. My apologies for interrupting.
No, it's okay. It's one of the, you make things real. And so with examples. So I just want to say the answer is my strategy has been consistent. It's pretty simple. Exhaust moral opportunities. But if you exhaust moral opportunities, that licenses immoral action. In other words, does that make sense? If the minute separation is the desire that's moral until separation is refused, at which point we don't sue for separation. We sue for, we commit.
We have legitimate moral outrage
To conquer. All right. So, since all we're trying to do is restore the natural, common, concurrent law that maximizes that maximizes self-determination by self-determined means, by sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity and display word and deed, and duty, which means rights, obligations, and alienations to produce all three of the above. There is no higher moral objective than that. You can say that there are problems that arise from meritocracy and natural aristocracy, the markets and everything. You can say the problems arise, but those problems are solvable. Whereas the desire to defeat those laws produces problems that aren't solvable. Okay, now I've made my summary.
All right. So the conversation I had with the nice Christian patient female was this. It's interesting. She regards this as the end times. Like time is going to end. And I'm like, it's just the end of an empire, and life goes on. And to cause her to come to have to deal with that reality that we're attempting to avert a dark age here.
Yes.
And she couldn't see how it could resolve itself in any fashion that she could imagine, because she's too nice. I said, well, it's too easy still, and you're still doubling down on your exhaustion of Christian charity. And what will happen is it will get bad. It can get bad enough that you will demand that the men fix it.
Yes.
And that's what is missing from this equation.
Well, it's also that why are we asking women? I mean, I want to throw that out there.
Well,
But when women are the problem, no, that is important. Women are the means by which the enemy converted enough people to this religion. They did it by women, because women can hide under the pretense of non-aggression, because their method of non-aggression is undermining. It's not on aggression. It's just undermining. So women are the vehicle. Single women in particular are the vehicle by which this is done. Why? Because women pay for the gut courses in the state that teach this cult, right? So women are spending $100,000 a piece to go to college to get the privilege of employment, right? In exchange for paying cult. And so who's financing all this left-wing activity? It's women. Women who go to college. So they're paying to join a cult. And because that cult is expensive, and because it offers a false promise that they can be free from the laws of nature, and because they're women in general who want to be free of laws of nature, because their drive is the opposite of men. Their drive is to maximize irresponsibility, whereas the drive for men is to maximize individual responsibility. They're funding the development of this cult. So, I mean, women are the problem. The question is why we listen to women at all. Now, the answer is because once we have women saying yes, in other words, once our women give us permission, that means we can be men. We don't have to be husbands.
They will demand it. They will demand it, and it's like the men will be He's doing the same thing. He's solving the same behavioral economic problem, which is, you know, how am I going to cause too much trouble here? And it's like, I'm not getting even support from the woman. It's like, but when the woman is pushing you out the door to go fix the problem outside, you are motivated to do it because it's not comfortable in the house.
All right, so what is the ideal condition for all civil wars in history? You have a surplus of unmarried men, you have an economic contraction, right? An economic contraction, and you have an inability to politically fix the problem. Those are the three conditions. Why do we get civil wars? It's always under those three conditions. The most important one of those is a surplus of single men. We have a surplus. We have a vast surplus of single men. Right? We have a vast surplus of pissed off men. Are those men farmers? Well, no, they're not. Their testosterone is lower. They're less fit, right? Right. They're more sedated by food and entertainment. But, you know, we don't need 30 million guys, right? I mean, we need 2 million guys to show up and say, because that's all the state can handle, is 2 million. We can't really do anything with 2 million. I mean, nobody can. I mean, the fucking Russians can't even field 200,000. And the Russians have 8 million men of fighting age in their 20s. Only 8 million, from 18 to 30. They have only 8 million men because their population has collapsed. Now, our population isn't that much bigger than the Russians. In other words, there's only about 220 white men. Right? And I'm just saying white because I'm not ostracizing blacks and Hispanic men. If you want to play the game, I'm all in with you, brother. I don't care about your race. Right? You either want to be a responsible man or you want. There's plenty of black guys that want to be responsible men. I see them on I follow half of them on the internet, right? I mean, on YouTube. Right? I fucking love these guys. Right? No, I'm fighting with those guys, no problem. Right? If you're the people who are into Jesus, right? If you're into Jesus, you're going to fight for Jesus. I'm into it with you too. I don't fucking care. Right? So I don't say it, but I'm trying to look at a demographic pool of available people, right? Yep. Under the worst possible conditions, we've certainly got around 6 million men who can show up. And that's just the ones that agree with us. Now, that's the United States, the largest army on earth is 2 million men. Of that 2 million men, you have more than half are always logistics.
Yep.
Right? So how many men does the American military really have? It doesn't have too many. Right? I mean, they actually have to count on the Guard and the police forces. But the Guard doesn't disagree with us. Half of the military doesn't disagree. The Guard doesn't disagree with us. And a lot of the police force doesn't disagree with this. We're saying that we're just going to, I mean, especially if we're saying it's not about race, it's about the state, right? And about devolution of the power of the states, that we have low control and we can actually suppress crime because the job of the state is to take care of the good people and persecute the bad until they. So we can produce around 6 million people. Pretty easily. Now, that's just the ones who agree with this. But if we actually get into heated battle, the number of men is going to be quite higher because basically it'll be house to house. But what's necessary? Well, this is interesting. There's 6 million men who will do something. Can 2 million men show up and not do anything except demand resolution? But how many men does it take to take down the whole United States? You want me to scare the hell out of you? It's under 1,000. Because that's how fragile it is. So the problem is you can catch 1,000 guys. Right? The thing about 200,000 guys is you can't catch 2 million guys. You can't, even if only 1,000 of them are doing anything, you can't catch them. So the point I want the right to realize is that if it comes to it, we can win. I just am a libertarian. I'm a Christian. I'm a mixture of Catholic and Protestant somehow.
Right.
And I'm not a member of the lower classes. Right? I'm a member of the better quarter of the upper quarter, right? And I have an ancestry like that. And so I want to settle the problem in traditional English fashion. In other words, Anglo-fashion, which is you call a parley a parliament. That's what a parliament comes from. A parley. You call parley, which is where you show up with your men and you show up with their men. You meet them on the field. parley with Parliament.
And
Right.
have a chat.
And you have a chat. The way you have a chat is you have the, now you can't walk away. Right? That's the reason for the
We're
parley.
insisting to
Right,
settle
we're
the matter.
insisting to settle the matter now, because otherwise we have to fight over it. And this is the proper, Anglo-Saxon, English, British, American way of solving differences. And it's why we have the system of government we have. A parliament conducts parleys,
That's it.
right? And so I don't want the government to think I'm in the business of organizing this. My business is to make that the people who are in the right and on the right, in other words, the people who are trying to prevent a dark age, right? The dark age, another Leninist horror from overtaking us and preventing another dark age, is that we have to be willing to pay that price. And the way and the first thing you have to do is say, I'm going to be there if this happens.
Right.
So all I want the right to do is, and this is the problem, is I am not permitted to go tell them how to win without crossing a line. Like, I can talk about this all day long because it's in our law, right? But I can't sit here and plan and organize, right? I can't become, and I can't instigate. I can only explain, right? Unless I'm trying to stay within the.
I understand.
So the way you do this is you say the right has to message, we're going to show by the millions, and we're going to either have a parley where we resolve our differences, and we're going to have a war. Now, they're not going to let that happen, right? The government isn't going to let a war happen, because it would mean horrible things, not only for us. If the population, we tell the population the consequence will be horrible for everyone, but it's less horrible than letting the enemy win, right? This evil religion get in here, and all we're going to do is burn the left wing of the government. In other words, they're going to burn them out of the academy, out of the media, out of it, and that it's going to be taken both by the courts, right? And that's all. Then that's a peaceful way of resolving our differences, right? And then if you want to have a blue city with crazy laws, you're welcome to, but your passport now is to your city, state, not to the country, right? And so you bring somebody in, you've got them, and that way I can deny you from coming into my state because your laws are different. Though what'll happen though is everybody will compete for talent like the German Princetons did. And so what will happen is all boats will rise, whereas they're under this universal model, they're destroying the country one city at a time, and all boats are sinking.
Right.
I just have to convince the right to say, you're going to fucking win. And I can't do that without actually laying the plan out again. So, or any part of the plan. And let's not have a civil war, because we have a civil war, it's going to take the whole fucking world. Now, is that okay? Well, if it means we're stopping globalism and the globalists, right, and we're restoring the natural state of the world, which is the conflict of civilizations, which is each civilization produces its own trade network, then I don't know what the problem is, because that's restoring equilibration of power. So why do we have to be responsible for the whole world if it's just burning our white folks, middle and lower middle and upper proletarian classes? Why do we have to burn that? We don't have to burn it. We can just separate into be basically Eurasia on one, and the Atlantic Alliance. There's New Zealand, Australia, North America, England, and the Nordics would all band together. Maybe Germany, I don't know. And I think that if we did that, then all of a sudden you get the Eastern Europeans too. I don't know. So we get something together, but generally you would expect a continental worldview, because they have different problems, and a naval or an air view like the Anglosphere, or at least the Nordics. We should probably call the Anglosphere the Nordic sphere, because it's really just a Nordic population.
Yeah.
So those people are dependent on water. So as long as we make that understood, that the alternative is that or a dark age. I mean, we're asking the guys who are willing to be responsible for preventing another dark age. Right? And I think they're angry enough that they do that. Right? But they have to know that they're going to win. And the reason they don't have to know. They have to know they have a chance of winning. And right now they just want a Trump to say show up. And the problem is that they want a Trump. Why? Because I'm sorry, I'm covering too many topics, but because we have the Christians, we have the Nazis, we have the ethno-nationalists, the civic nationalists, the classical liberals, and the libertarians. Everybody wants their hero to be in charge. It doesn't work that way. We live in a trifunctional argument. Nobody's in charge. Our elites work together in parlays between the trifunctional of the church, the commerce law, and the state military. And we work that trifunctional system for the benefit of all of us, depending on what our bias is. So no, you don't get to have your Christian, your church-run government, but you do get to have a Christian station. No, you don't get to have your Nazi government, but you can have ethnocentric states. No, you don't get to have your classical liberalism because you have to be bound by the limits of your the exporting costs onto your and privatizing gains onto your people, right? For your people. So you don't get to have any of those things. What you get to have is what serves everyone's common interest, which is not what the left wants. They want to solve a minority interest at the expense of the productive. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on for that. That means I've talked incessantly for 2 hours and 21 minutes.
Not quite incessantly. You've done well. It was a good day.
Well, let's give therapy. So the problem is that once Trump lost, which was again obvious he was going to lose, and once they clamped down on our people, they lost heart. And so the left was successful in undermining our people through the means by which the left wars is undermining. They undermine the institutions of cooperation. Well, they undermine the family, they undermine the economy, they undermine our rule of law, they undermine the courts, they undermine our government, they undermine our religion. I mean, of course, they're going to undermine your ability to cooperate and talk to each other, which is at scale. So we have to win that battle to be able to organize. But my hope here is that the people are now in the position where they have gone from being they were morally right and could win politically to where they're morally right and they can't win politically.
Which is quite different.
And so if they've reached that point, I'm more confident in talking about how my predictions, which is that you're going to lose the argument battle, of course. You're going to lose the political battle. Of course, it's just been lost.
So yeah, it's a political futility.
Right. So now you can deal with the court itself, or the court of jurisprudence, right? Or the court of parliament, and the court of nature, which is war. Because we don't have a king, can't appeal to the king, even though a king would go along with us. Because, of course, being converted by a hostile religion out to destroy your civilization, one of the primary objectives of which is destroy the monarchies, which is the Jewish and French idea, as well as the communist idea, is they want to destroy our monarchies because the monarchies are the defense against these systems of undermining. So without that, we only have these steps left. And so that's the case. Now, what do I want to have happen? I want a discussion to have happen in open public, so we never have to have this issue. We just pass some laws to outlaw the woke, because the majority of people have come to understand that this is just the next wave of Marxism, destructive of Marxism. But I just don't see the political numbers to make that happen, because we've been displaced by immigration and reproduction. Now, contrary to what the right wants, which I think is right, you got to realize that the blacks through abortion kill millions and millions and millions of their own.
Yes.
By withdrawing abortion, of course, you're going to further exacerbate the problem, not only of the reducing our numbers, but of increasing the numbers of the lower classes, which are then impossible to solve through economic reform. So I don't know. I mean, then we got the millions of people crossing the border illegally. We've got a huge Hispanic population, but at least there's promise for them. We've got
Yes.
Muslim integration into some of our cities. We have Jewish integration in some our main cities, DC, Washington, DC, Washington DC, New York, and Los Angeles. And so they're in our legal, our financial, and our communication system. So we have integration from a lot of places. So it's not an easy thing to do when your whole point is nobody gets to be in control, except what you're doing by not letting anybody be in control is you're not defending enough against somebody getting into control by surreptitious means. In other words, we only defend against force. We don't defend against sedition because we have this thing called free speech instead of free, truthful, reciprocal speech. And that's not seditious or treasonous against the natural common concurrent law, by which we guarantee each other sovereignty and demonstrated interest, reciprocity and display word and deed as a means of preserving the self-determination by self-determined means, which means our responsibility for ourselves and others.
Right?
Can we cover any more material in one fucking 2 hours?
It's been quite a roving experience.
What didn't we cover?
I think we've covered, I mean.
We talked about, we did the complete history of why our civilization gets overreaches at every stage, right? And how the pattern keeps repeating itself because we overreach, right? And we've talked about how Christianity and Arianism, or rule of law, or Arianism, are both extremely valuable, but open ourselves to vulnerability because we're too tolerant. We've talked about how we've corrected the problem of monarchy, which is that the purpose of monarchy is not to have authority, it's to prevent their authority. And the reason the monarchy has specific powers above the legislature, in other words, is not because the monarchy is sovereign, but the law is sovereign. So the monarchy is there as the insurer of last resort to protect the people against the creation of authority within the government, right? Thereby the monarchy and the military are above the law in the restoration of the law. And I don't mean legislative law. I mean the natural law, which means the Constitution, because our Constitution is a constitution of natural law, even though it's missing. I found another one. There's 7 points and two subsequent. It's because I didn't clarify something earlier. So our Constitution has some holes in it that it doesn't say it shall be under the common law, right? Because it was understood. It was understood that it was a common law. It didn't say that you have rights. It doesn't specifically say you have rights, duties, and alienations. It just enumerates a few of them, right? And it doesn't say, well, it doesn't explicitly lay out the strategy of self-determination by self-determination. I mean, it's obvious when you read the Declaration, but it doesn't say a self-determination by self-determined means by sovereignty demonstrated in reciprocity, display word and deed, truth and duty and excellence, etc. It doesn't say that, right? It's implied, logic is there. It's like you can say there's logic to all the laws of the universe, right? We have to discover them. Well, I mean, there's a logic to what we do because we're incrementally discovering laws of the universe. We just didn't write it down in a way that needed to be expressed because we couldn't imagine anything other, which is what metaphysics means. It means you assume things, you can't imagine anything otherwise, right? So that
the irony of that is just something else.
It's just profound, right? And so they didn't say that. They did while they implemented the common law, the natural law of the common law. They do state natural law of nature, and nature's God, right? So they do state natural law. They don't state the common law. They assume it. They don't explain why these things exist, and they implement concurrency, but they don't explain it. So these things are attackable, right? They don't say the purpose of the government is a parliament for the resolution of differences by producing a market for exchange between the classes, right? I mean, they don't say that the reason we have these parliaments and the houses and whatever is to be able to make sure that we're reaching concurrency, not commonality. Because commonality is fine in the negativa, because we all prohibit each other from doing the same things. But concurrency is necessary to reach our ambitions, the positive. So that's not stated. The fact that we got a president, which is the worst fucking option, instead of a monarchy or not, and what you want is a monarchy, a cabinet, and a parliament. And in the parliament, you need, and the purpose of the parliament, right, is to react to the cabinet. The problem is we got to be a positive parliament when we wanted to be a negative parliament. In other words, the parliament will be a jury that prohibits the cabinet from, which is the management team, from enacting things that they don't want to pay for. Instead of we got a parliament that rules in the French method. In other words, it's via positiva.
Yes.
Right. Well, the only people that got this right are Texas. Thank you, Texas. You get everything right. Which is that their freaking parliament can only meet like what, 30 days a year or something. They can't get in a lot of trouble. Whereas our parliament sits the whole time. It's like our legal system. You go to Yale and Harvard and California, Stanford, and their legal laws is how to undermine the state. It's not how to advance the state. Not how to maintain the state, not how to maintain natural common concurrency, but how to undermine it. That's what they teach. Well, we got a court government, we got a jury system, which is jury, right? Parliament, right? And we have a jury system that can actually propose things instead of veto things, or ascend or descend things. We have a president that's actually more powerful than a king.
Yep.
Right, but he hasn't got the power to restore the power to overcome the law in the restoration of the law, because the law is stated, as I've stated, which is the group revolutionists of the European people, the sovereignty and demonstrated interest, etc., the commonality, natural law, commonality, and consequence. Why? Because that's a science of cooperation. It's not an opinion. It's not a philosophy. That's the science of cooperation. It maximizes the elimination of authority, providing the maximization of independent thought, providing the maximum responsibility, which makes European high trust society possible. They don't write that shit down because of just what they did, because that's what metaphysics means. It means you can't imagine it being otherwise. You take it for granted like it's gravity. Well, it's the same reason they got the church. Well, they didn't, when they meant the church was supposed to be a freedom of religion, they didn't mean it that you could bring in a hostile religion into the country. What they meant is that the state can't tell the Christian churches, right,
how to do it.
How to do it. It doesn't mean they can't outlaw non-Christian religions. Right, they certainly can. There's no reason not. Matter of fact, I can't see why we don't outlaw non-Christian religions. Or, I mean, maybe pagan, anything European. And the reason is because every other religion is hostile to the natural common concurrent law. There's no other religion that, I mean, Judaism and Islam are designed to destroy it. So, I mean, how do you complain about Buddhism? Well, the Buddhism tells you you're not responsible, right? That's an undermining of our law, right? If you have, what about Hinduism? I can't tell you because I can't figure the fucking thing out.
I can't tell. I guess like the jury's out.
Well, I mean, they've got the English legal system and it seems to work for them. So how do I complain against it when, I just can't. And with Christianity, I can reduce it down to five principles.
Wait. And this is for the audience. Kurt is not known as a shrinking violet. He will be happy to complain about them if he had a handle. There is no handle there.
No, I just can't.
Ask the French.
How do you? Nobody I know of complains about Hinduism.
No, I've never heard it.
Nobody does. I mean, it's because you can't even figure the fucking thing out. And if you look at it underneath it, it seems to be designed to produce harmony through castes, which is a caste is basically a military rank. And so they took the Indo-European military system and they put a caste system together for it, and they gave out ranks and duties and responsibilities, and except that instead of being an aggressive form, it's a productive form. And in that sense, it's insane and brilliant, right? I mean, and the only problem is you can't change ranks.
Yes, you're stuck.
That's the only problem I see in it. right? But the reason they did it is they
Wait,
could stop.
the good thing is it's not my problem.
Okay, well, that's as a behavioral
In
scientist.
an idealistic sense, it's like it has some cooperative shortcomings, let's say.
There's no lie. They don't even say it's a religion, right? Because when we say religion, we mean it's a law you got to obey. They don't think of it that way. They think of it as a way of life, philosophy and myth by anthropomorphic means. And I'm like, I can't argue with that, because if you told me how would you train the maximum number of people across the broadest range of abilities, that's how you would do it. And I'm like, okay, well, so what's wrong with this? I mean, they've even laid out your duty in each class. I'm like, great. So how do I get from, if I'm born with, the right mix of talents, why can't I move from this rank to that one? Well, I mean, that's it. That's the problem. I'm like, okay, well, that's a fixable problem. Now you just got to go to school and learn this rank, right? The mythology of this, the fucking 9,872,463 gods that freaking cast has, right? I mean, it's freaking genius. And you know what I love about it? It's like unarguable. In other words, it's so flexible, it's unfalsifiable. In other words, you can't criticize it because it just can move. It's a purely adaptive religion. So my problem is I can't get to the first principles of it. I just can't. I mean, sure, some Hindu scholar. The problem is talking to a Hindu scholar is like you've got to translate 8 levels of indirection. And I just can't fucking do it. Especially with all the names. They use a name, but they won't say it like that's our equivalent of God of War. Right. So and these deities, they have like personality.
You have to figure it out.
Right. They have personalities. So it's not like they're purely like our saints, which
they're more like psychological.
They're more psychological. And so it's like the Greek and Roman gods are hard enough. And at least, this is a problem with Germanic gods. We try to make them as we overstate Greek and Roman godhoods, like their responsibilities, when they're really personalities. Right, so the personality has a bias, is the way to look at it, right?
Yeah.
You get into the Germanic gods, and it's like, okay, well, they're all just personalities, right? And so now you're talking about what personality do I associate with? And of course, Thor is the farmers. It turns out to be the farmers one, which is odd, right? Why would that be? Right? Odin, which is the aristocracy one. You're like, why would that be? It's more like piece. I mean, Tyr sort of disappears, right? It gets melded in. And so, you look at these, but they're more personalities. Well, in Hinduism, I'm like, I have a nervous breakdown keeping track of those persons. I mean, how do you do that? You spend your whole life trying to figure that stuff out. There's literally thousands of them. I mean, it might be 900 or something. It might be 1,000, but I mean, it's just
the difference is minute.
So, What If Altist, Rudder did a great piece on India recently, 2 of them, I think. And I think he did the best simplification I've seen so far in a video. So I'd recommend that too. I mean, I recommend his stuff. I don't have to recommend his stuff because everybody we know. Anybody who watches us watches him.
That makes sense.
There's nobody, like, we don't have to even talk about it because everybody goes, well, he's righty. Because I was talking to him the other day. I said, I just write about fucking everything. I mean, I can't, the stuff I would disagree with him on isn't worth disagreeing on. Right? It's like, what's the value of the Catholic Church during the late? I mean, and I'm trying to deal with the question of law, right? And that's the different question from valuing society,
right?
Or there's all these. You can cut this die many ways. Have I done the India thing, the religion thing?
Yes.
No? So the point I was trying to make is the religions, there's no reason we can't make it a Christian nation, and we should, because there's no evidence any other religion is not a sedition. And that's because all religions contain a group evolutionary strategy. And I don't think this is obvious from watching our work together.
Yeah, yeah.
is that there are only so many permutations of the sequence of priorities and the evolution of the three institutions, faith,
Right.
law, and state, right? There can only be done so many ways, right? And there are only so many permutations of group evolutionary strategy. That's the one that people have a hard time with, right?
I think so.
Right. But we ended up with trying all of them. And only the ones that are survivable survived as
There
civilizations.
you have it. How hard was that to figure out? Because all the other ones died.
Yeah, they're gone because they don't work, right? So you can have religion, then you're going to have your first founding institution, right? Which is going to be religion, state, or contract, right? And so it's because the Middle East, right, gets religion first because
Right.
China gets state first, right? Europeans get contract first, and Hindu gets religion first, right? And so you say, okay, well, those first one's the strongest and is the least malleable. The second institution you get, which will be less
right.
so. The third one will be weak. So in our
Right.
list,
It's like a superficial layer.
right? I mean, and sometimes it doesn't get developed at all. Like China will say they have law. They don't. They have command. The truth is, only Europeans have law. Right. So we started law first. Why? Because we developed an entrepreneurial, voluntary civilization of warriors. Right. So we developed pirates. Right. So land pirates. So that's what original civilization origin. So we got land, then state, then religion. So our religion was weak. China got state, then a philosophy as a religion, and they didn't get law. The Middle East got religion, and they couldn't get state, and they couldn't get law. Right. And so why? Because religion is a really easy vehicle to monopolize all three. Right. The state is a really easy way of monopolizing two. And if you start with contractualism and law, right, which is law, you can't monopolize anything. In other words, you're left with the profundity of the past 5 minutes is beyond most people's comprehension.
That made me laugh out loud because it's true. It's like the monopoly is the problem.
Right. The monopoly is the problem, is because you lose competitive competition between the feminine cooperative religion, the masculine state, and the neutral reciprocal law. And so what happens is whatever your first institution is becomes your strongest. And whatever your first institution is dependent on things we covered, like the 9 criteria you and I covered back. I don't know. Somebody can go look at our original tapes when we were still going through the chapter by chapter. We talked about group evolutionary strategies, but I mean, your relationship to the physical world, right? Your relationship to your means of production, your relationship to others, the means by which your aristocracy evolved, and the relationship between your aristocracy and your peasantry, which is, and the Europeans, the only case where it's equal. That's we're all the same, we're all warriors. We just conquered people. So we started out with a top-down society, conquered people, so we developed aristocratic philosophy. But if you're in the Middle East, you start out with, if you go back in our videos and watch how many times Brad has a joy about talking about the barbarians coming out and kicking the previous level of monarchies out and leaving behind the clerical class and their religious adherents, as this rotating pandemonium. Of course, religion is going to be your stable.
It's the only thing that's possible that makes
it's the only thing that can be, right? I mean, so you just end up with a limited number of choices. So we explored them, and they're the ones that survive. But even though we're the ones that survive, we can still decide which is best and which is not.
That's right.
And we can do that by the rate of evolutionary development versus the rate of stagnation or decline. Well, it turns out Islam is really bad for you. It turns out that Hinduism it doesn't go anywhere, right? It turns out that Chinese can go somewhere, but it stagnates because the state's too powerful versus the middle class. And the Europeans, they don't want to have enough trifunctionalism to be able to preserve enough competition to create all those wars we blame ourselves for, but are the means by which we developed all these great pacifist nonsense that we call that are duty, right? That made reconciliation possible, and this market competition that drove us into a continuous recursive innovation over centuries. So I mean, they're just, Europeans got it right only because we stumbled on it, because that's the only way you can organize a polity on the steppe is through, right? You got to keep moving. So you got carts with yurts on them and oxen and then horses. And all of a sudden, how do you go war in that? Well, you don't have a place to defend. You have a herd to defend. So it's done by mobility. Well, mobility leads to mobility, and taking out your herds leads not to familism or clerisy. It leads to alliances of warrior families, because it takes a whole warrior family to furnish horses, bronze, and wheels, right, and armors. It's expensive to create that kind of wars, but it's so much more advantageous that you can cover more than 20 miles in a single day.
That's right.
And so, I mean, that's why the Indo-European expansion happened. But it didn't. It's because it's democracy is the only means of running a piracy. Isn't that funny to you? That has never. Every time I say it or even think about it, it's just funny to me. It's like I'm going to get on my Jaguar. I'm going to put little pirate flags on the beginning, and no one's going to understand why I'm running around with diplomatic flags that have pirates on them. And it's me. I get to laugh every time I look at it.
I was talking to a guy who was up in Alaska on a dredging for gold in off Nome. And he said one day they flew pirate flags and the Coast Guard came out and were all on serious, who's doing this?
Oh, they flew what?
The Jolly Rogers.
Oh no, you said it too fast. It didn't come out.
My apologies.
One day
they flew the Jolly Rogers on their dredge vessel off Nome, Alaska, and this caused quite a stern reaction by the Coast Guard, which is they put them in the mess hall of this multi-story facility offshore, and at gunpoint, essentially, it's like, you boys are in a shitload of trouble.
Yeah.
Like, we don't allow that here.
The problem is that unless you're part of that culture, you don't understand what a flag means.
Right.
It's not an arbitrary thing. Right? You don't just put any flag you want out. Right? You can decorate with things, but you're flying under a flag. If you say you're flying under a piracy flag, right, they
it's all on, man.
You know, and it's the Coast Guard. They have a really ancient. I mean, we forget that America is an old country by world standards, right? Britain is the oldest, right? The English.
Yes.
We forget that we're really old countries because our way of rule of law allows us to reform without having to kill a lot of people, right?
Right.
So, especially with the Coast Guard, you don't. That's like driving up and showing your ass.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you just don't do that to soldiers, right? Unless you want to get shot. And I just like the idea of I can see doing it with a smile.
Right.
Right. You know, I mean, there's different things, but if you're flying your colors, you're saying,
no, they didn't do it again.
Who's insuring me? Right.
We're ensuring you're not.
Yeah.
Who's insuring you? That's what the Coast Guard came to ask. Who's insuring this vessel?
Because you're just saying, what you're saying with a pirate flag, of course, is that I'm after you, right? I'm going to steal your stuff. This is war.
Right.
Although I got to tell you, in my Constitution, I do have restoration of letters of marque, which means
I think that's quite reasonable.
That private individuals, when something happens to a person, you know, my attitude is with your nationals is, if you let us in, you're letting one of our nationals in your country, it's under our protection.
Right.
That means unless it's a crime here, right? You can ask them to leave, but if it's not a crime here, you can't do anything else. In other words, if you are misbehaving on a beach in Saudi Arabia and running around in your bikini, they can ask you to leave, give you 3 days to leave, but they can't put you in prison, right? And so, but letter of marque says, you know, if somebody does a crime against an American, You have the right as a private group to go
Right.
out and correct that wrong. We don't have to.
But there's no need to restore that. That right is enshrined in the Constitution as it is.
Uh,
Congress may issue letters of marque and require
Congress
them.
right, but what I want to do, right, letters of marque, and remember, we have to remember context.
Yes.
And so letters of marque are generally is a naval,
Ah,
right? So what we want to do is we want to generalize
I
the
see.
specific. For example, there's no reason there's no reason private people aren't defending the border. There's no reason private people aren't defending against piracy on the seas. If you're wealthy enough to do, I mean, come on. I mean, I could definitely have afforded to taken a boat out in there, gone to Somalia, brought cheeseburgers and a bunch of fellow rednecks with beer, and sunk pirates.
Right.
Fun and profit, right? Right. Well, that's letter of marque.
Right.
So the problem is that the way you got a letter of marque before was you got it from a military officer.
Right.
And so we have to be beginning that in the world we live in, the police force has and the sheriffs have, we need to bring letter of marque down to a level which is commensurate with it, right?
Ah.
So I'm trying to restore every opportunity for the individual to defend every opportunity and every obligation for the individual to defend the commons. Like if it was permissible to close the border, American men would close the border.
Yes.
In other words, it's the state that stops them. That the state is facilitating immigration on purpose, for the purpose of diluting population.
Yes, it's
And honestly, of all the immigrants there are, the Hispanics are the ones I'm going to least complain about, right? They're Christian, right?
They're finding anybody inside the mix that's coming across the border because it's just an open border.
Right. So what I care about is the rate of introgression is greater than the rate of integration, and so that's not helping. If we have to have our legal documents in more than one language, I'm okay with state payment for teaching people English, but I think if you can't, it's like. I'm trying to think of my age. Like, I don't know why I wasn't required to get my passport in Ukraine to speak at least Russian.
Hmm.
I mean, I believe I should have been required to do that. I think for America, you should be required to speak English, and I think citizenship should entail responsibility. Right, it should be quite a bit harder to get citizenship, and it should come with the obligations. Although, you watch these people who actually get their citizenship by earning it, they seem to still be pretty goddamn proud of it.
Yeah.
So my view is that the law has to be codified. It's less open to leftist manipulation by their word games. So,
We're in a good
why am I talking so? Oh, I know why. Okay. I feel like I could talk to you about this subject all fucking day long.
Oh yeah.
So we did freedom of religion was the whole, right? We did that, the lack of clarification of the law.
Yes.
We did that. See, I can go back. I can retrace my steps.
Right.
It happens under certain conditions. The stars align.
That's it.
We talked about religion. We talked about the holes in the Constitution. We talked about commonality. We talked about the monarchy being necessary, right? Which is going to be very hard for Americans. But it's just, I'm sorry.
That is hard for Americans.
I think if we got one of the British monarchy to come over and that might be a different issue. In other words, they would have a certain kind of legitimacy.
Right.
But the problem with the monarchy is picking one. Like if we just had a great war, right, with a great statesman emerge, it'd be one.
Yes.
We really do need I mean, Trump is acting like a monarch, really. He really acts like, which is why I don't object to him, because I know what he's doing. Even though I object to some of the silly stuff he says, but he's acting like a monarch.
Nobody's trying to defend mean tweets, sir.
Yeah. And then we've talked about rates of reproduction.
Yes.
And we've in previous issues talked about a graduated economy instead of a monopoly economy.
Right.
So that which would sound to socialists very nice, by the way.
Right.
Because they would not be thrown to the meat grinder.
That's right.
Protected.
That's right.
Guys like you and me, it's like I don't care about the meat grinder. I need, my business partner Jim, when he worked for digital equipment, needed non-aggression training. Right. I had to get therapy to tone it down. Not because it's because I'm a fucking dog chasing up. I mean, I'm a dog chasing trucks, right? I mean, if there's a game to be won, I want to play it. And those of you who've seen me online, you've seen me mostly while I've been seriously ill or exhausted, but I'm getting healthy and it's coming back. I'm like, I better not get too out of hand here. All right. But so we talked about those things. We talked about the opportunities of for reconciliation, which are persuasion, politics, courts, Congress, and war. We talked about those issues.
Yes.
We talked about the Overton window of the people, where they are, and how desperate it is for them to, how difficult it is for them to.
The issue is this: is to recognize the exhaustion of political opportunity.
Right, and so I have to count on you guys from telling, because I have no fucking idea.
No, but it's like there is a point, and it's like this is. It appears that this is what had to happen, which is the final realization that the opportunity for political change has been exhausted, because it can be exhausted by they cheat so good, or you just can't ever win because you're too little now.
Right, and you can't win, even though your ideas are better, because they're more costly. In other words, people are rational actors, and if whiteness is indeed the most psychologically, emotionally, and intellectually costly, and it is, which is why it's so hyper adaptive and evolutionary and productive. You're maximizing individual responsibility. Well, I mean, what's the reason capitalism works and communism doesn't? It's incentive. So what does incentive mean? It means responsibility. Right? I mean, under communism, you're not responsible. You just do, except for what you're assigned. Whereas in capitalism, you're assigned for the discovery of opportunities and their exploitation efficiently.
At risk,
the resources available. And so you wonder why these things work, is because they have to work that way. It's asking people to act irrationally. Does that mean we have to throw everybody into the material economy? No. It means the people who can need to, the people who can't need to be supported, and the people who need direction need to be told. Right? And that's just how the world, that's not a crime against everybody. There are plenty of people who would, if they were given the opportunity, just go like the union workers did, go to a meeting hall and be told where to go to work every day, or just get the mail and be told where to work. Matter of fact, can you think of how much easier your life is?
Oh my!
If you're not looking for work, right? Your problem is you're not going to get paid if you don't work, right? Right? Excuse me, did I say that right? If you don't work, you might not get paid.
Right.
But by and large, you'll get paid because we'll find work for you. The Chinese do this to some degree, right? I mean, they have a lot of nonsense jobs. Nobody cares if people have nonsense jobs, right? I mean, I don't care. I might care that a road worker gets $140,000 a year versus overtime, but I don't care that guy gets to retire at 50 because it's hard on his body.
That's right.
Or that he doesn't have to search for work because we guarantee him employment.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's just too much of that. I mean, we end up with what we've got now, which is state employees make 3 times what they should and a pension, instead of them make what they should and a pension, right? And everybody gets a pension. That's just it. So people compete for these non-jobs.
Yep.
Right.
It's rent seeking.
It's rent seeking activity. But that's because the market is unsuitable for the skills they have. Right. And this is my argument today, is that we're going to have to shift a lot of people from the private economy to the commons economy. What do I mean by that? It means that we used to have people keep track of gardens and trees and make things beautiful. Now, right now, what's the value of beauty? Go to any old European downtown and you'll tell you what the value of beauty is. It's extraordinarily high, right? So what would be the beauty? What would be the value of beauty? Well, the value of beauty is very, very high. Well, let's have people do things that they get to be responsible for, which is making
things
right. And so why are we throwing people into high school where they learn nothing, instead of spending high school how to learn what is arbor?
Arboralism.
Yeah, there's a
arbory.
Person is an arborist. I don't know what the well, and I know something about this, because if you go to Germany, there's like you look at how the Germans set up their freaking trees by the road, and it's like an act of German engineering. Right. Then you come to America and it's done in the cheapest way possible. It is done, but it's done the cheapest way possible. We don't want it done the cheapest way possible. We want it to be the most beautiful way possible. Well, I mean, so you need to have a commons economy. You need to have a private economy. You have a macro private economy, which is a professional economy. And you have an industrial economy, which is industrial financial, which is capital. You need to have those economies. So why do we throw people at the bottom into the fucking meat grinder? It's cruel. Why do we not give them educations? In other words, why do we give them what we call education instead of vocational education? Right? It's fucking cruel. Why do we send black kids to school with white and Asian kids, or black and Hispanic? Why? Because they need a military discipline. And an Asian kid basically doesn't need any. Right? Why? Because we evolved differently. We evolved and mature at different rates of intersexual development. Right? So, I mean, am I making a wide generalization there? Of course I am, because I talked about all people in a category, and all people are always in a distribution. I've only had 2 cups of coffee, but I'm talking like I had 5.
I was impressed.
All right, so
see, I found this arboricultural.
Yeah.
Arboriculturalism.
It's the under horticulture.
Arboriculture.
Under horticulture, yeah. So my dad owned a lawn and garden center, so I learned all that stuff, like how to do trees and nitrogen. And
that's cool.
It was awesome. Right? And why don't we have that? I mean, if you go over to even the Soviets did this. I mean, you can't see it anymore because it's all falling apart. But the Soviets built these amazing parks.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, it was very family oriented. The other thing is, in the Soviet model, you didn't do things because you know what, Russians aren't gentle about disciplining people in public.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So have I covered enough material and summarized the material efficiently today?
I think we have.
Okay. I don't know why I feel like I keep going. It seems like there's more stuff to do, but we've been 3 hours now, and I feel like I should shut up. But it's just I didn't think it was going to be that interesting today. Look at all the shit we covered.
I thought it was quite a remarkable series.
So I'm going to blame it on. How can I blame this on you?
I know, right? Well, I'm just going to say, click these like, subscribe, and notification bells, and leave some glorious comments about the wonderful conversation today. That's what I'm going to say to the audience. Then Kurt's going to stop recording here real fast.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Like, subscribe, bell, comment, say funny things. Sorry for going on so long, but it was just so much stuff to talk about, and I was in the right frame of mind to talk about it, so it got covered. So, and I didn't run out of gas, which is still amazing. All right.
Don't go, Kurt.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.